Time for me to open this session of the Enfield Local Plan examination. I'm Stephen Lee, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan and report to the Council in due course. Good morning, everyone. So everyone can hear me. Okay. A few things first. Obviously, I don't know, Councillor Sampson. Welcome. I don't know if you've been. I don't think you've been here before. Have you been here before? You have. You have. Excellent. That means I don't need to go through my long and boring spiel. That's useful. So that's good. So what we'll do then, with that in mind, I can bypass sort of normal housekeeping measures and the like. I think we'll take those as read. And we will, just for politeness and completeness, obviously do introductions and then see if there are any matters arising. I've got one tiny announcement to make, and then we'll move straight in. Obviously, I know you're interested in 22, so we'll start with that. We'll do that site, and then obviously then we can move on, probably going through them chronologically after that. I know there are some sites where the council's got things they want to say, but I think we'll just deal with them as they come up. So as you know from previous sessions, how this will generally work is I will ask my questions on URB 22, then obviously open up to yourself to raise any points you want to raise. Council will come back and say anything else you want to say, and then we'll try not to have too much back and forth, but get all the points you want to make out and aired. Thank you. So with that in mind, we'll start then with introductions from the council, and then say I've got see if there are any matters arising. I've just got one thing I just want to say. So on procedural issues. Mr. Dale Harris, thank you.
Morning, sir. My name is Matthew Dale Harris. I'm a barrister instructed by Sharp Pritchard on behalf of the council.
Good morning, everyone. I'm May Hope, Head of Strategic Planning and Design at Enfield Council.
Morning, Rebecca Rain, Planning Policy Lead on behalf of the Council.
Good morning, Edward Jones, Spatial Planning Manager, Enfield Council.
Good morning, Luke Brown, at Planning Policy, Enfield Council.
Julian Sampson, Councillor for Oakwood Ward.
Thank you. Welcome. Right, one thing I just want to say before we start, and I'll see if there are any matters arising, is just for absolute completeness and avoidance of any doubt or impropriety, just for information, with Mr. Feeney, today's programme officer, in place, when I was setting up this morning, I did speak briefly to Councillor Sampson about some procedural issues and the right to be, how the right to be heard worked and so on. We didn't discuss any matters of merits or anything of that nature, but obviously because the council weren't in the room, I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that.
Thanks for letting me know.
Mr. Feeney was here, so there's no discussions in private, but I think it's important to make that clear. So,
thank you, sir. Okay,
thank you. With that in mind, are there anything issues you wish to raise?
I understand that there is a scheduled practice fire alarm today at 2 p.m. So, yes.
We may or may not need that, be here for that, but we'll see. We'll see how quickly we can get through things. Okay, thank you. Right, so with no further ado, we'll move on to, we'll start with URB 22, which is Oakwood Station Car Park. Bear with me while I get there in my document. So, as I've got a few questions, first of all, just to get some clarity. It refers to 52 dwellings, but then I do note that in criterion G, it does refer to non-residential uses along Bramley Road. So I think, first and foremost, just obviously I always generally ask for sort of status and everything else, but some clarity on what is actually being proposed, and because there's no reference in the land use requirement or the tables to non-residential use. So what are they, and how do they relate to propose the allocation? So first things first. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think Ms. Hope's on the.
Thank you, sir. So there's a parade of shops right next to the station, so they're in use. So it's not just the land use requirements for new homes, it's also re-provision of any kind of loss of Class E as well.
According to the inset map, So the front, so there are, yeah, I can obviously see where the parade is now, and there's also a parade on the other side, the sort of southwest of the station. So it's like sort of either side of the station. This is one I have been to. So obviously I'm getting through them all as I can, but I thought there's not. I don't think, but you correct me if I'm wrong, the red line of the boundary actually takes in any of those shops. So in terms of, is there anything to re-provide?
So there's the it's the northern corner, if I point on my map.
So there is something in there, isn't there?
So the parade of shops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think there's 6 shops along that parade, so that's not included within the red line. It's just the smaller shops around the corner.
Okay. So, as always, there's two points here. One is, are you requiring the replacement of the retail floor space? Is that an absolute necessity? And if so, obviously it needs to be in the land use requirements to make that clear. Or is it, well, if the applicant were to want to replace or provide non-residential floor space, then that's where it should go, and it should go along as it sets out in criterion G. So I guess it comes down to what is it you're actually seeking, or what is if there are, then this is where it should be. But so is it? Yeah.
We're just double checking, but I recall this area being designated as a local parade of shops. So we'll just double check on that point. If that is, that will trigger one of the policies within the rest of the plan in the town centre section.
Well, the action is obviously if it is an expectation, then it needs to be in the land use requirement. So it needs to be clear. So.
I can confirm it is within the local parade of shops, and yes, it will be in the land use requirements.
Okay. So that would remove if the again council assumption. So obviously, when we're talking about main modifications, just or what would have to, these are without prejudice to any, so it's a bit like if the site is to remain in the plan, these are the things that would have to be done to make them. So it's not me saying the site's in the, the site's definitely in the plan by saying you need to make the changes. It's so we don't, say without prejudice to any final decision. But I think obviously if I conclude that the site is sound in principle, then these are the things that would have to be done to make the policy effective, basically. So just to make that clear. It's similar when talking about appeals, when you discuss conditions, it's these are the conditions that would have to be put in place if the appeal was allowed, but it doesn't necessarily mean the appeal is going to be allowed. So it's the same principle. I'm assuming that this is a core for site scheme from all our previous discussions, and that there's no scheme. Is there a scheme in place at the moment?
Yes, that's correct. So the site was submitted by TfL Commercial Development, so it's the promoter arm of Transport for London. We don't currently have any pre-application discussions in place. It was submitted as part of their kind of call, as part of our call for sites for approximately 100 residential units, and scope for inclusion of complementary retail and commercial units uses as well.
So if it was put, is the fact it's gone down from 100 then to 52 because you've assessed that's what would be achievable?
Yes, that's correct. So originally the site was submitted for 100 homes. Using the work that we've derived from HELA, we've kind of reduced the site area to preserve the mature trees and to ensure that development is set back from the listed station building. So the typology we've used, which is the, I'll double check, avoids the need for tall buildings, recognising the station setting and also local townscape as well. We refer to that within paragraph 318 of our hearing statement.
Yes, it's the rail yard typology.
Thank you.
That's 317 of the hearing statement.
Thank you. So would this be one, if it's following the sort of approach you've taken on other similar sites, the one that you're not expecting to be in the 5-year supply?
That's correct. So,
Okay. I think in terms of principle on this one, there's been obviously, I think there are two main issues. One is going to be, or one is rather, the loss of parking at the station. So I think it'd be interesting to know what the council's done in terms of assessing the loss of parking in terms of, well, yeah, what effects that might have, I guess in terms of obviously operation of the station, whether it has any effects on different particular groups and effects on traffic and so on and so forth. So have you had any thought to that?
So it's a TfL-owned site. So obviously they are the ones who have the information about the utilisation. I don't believe the council has its own information as to utilisation rates. I understand it has been considered. It's been run past Mr. Chris Cole, who you heard about earlier, and he doesn't have concerns from a transport policy perspective. But I don't think there's any specific assessment as to utilisation or so forth, because it's not data the council holds.
Sorry. Inspector, just to add, there is an adjacent car park over the road, so I suspect that's behind some of the thinking.
I mean, obviously, any planning application that was to come in, there'd be normal consideration of traffic impacts and so on, as with any plan application. But I suppose here, the question would be, if it were allocated, would there be an assumption on the decision maker's part that the loss of parking had been, accepted, if you like, as well, it is acceptable in principle, without, so that would be a starting point, because, and is that problematic?
Well, I think so. That's where Mr. Cole isn't here today. He's I'm afraid on holiday. But I think that's where his view that it's acceptable for there to be this loss of parking in that location, of course, next to a tube station, and there are obviously lots of policies about encouraging sustainable modes of travel. So that's where the council is on that. It's not backed by a quantitative assessment specifically, but obviously there's also the strategic work as well.
Okay. Just as a sort of looking at it slightly broader, actually, it's not about the specific points on this site, but it's Oakwood Station, proximity to Chase Park has been put forward. Obviously, the proximity of Oakwood Station has been put forward as a benefit, or as at least an argument as to why Chase Park has got some sustainability credentials. So would the council, and the answer might refer me to the answer you've given some moments ago, but would there be any implication for that in terms of, say, utilisation of the station, accessibility of the station, not just for existing travellers, but also if you're moving in an additional X thousand, 2,500, or whatever it is, 3,700, I think, altogether over the course of the life thing. And Oakwood Station's being seen as one of the benefits of that. Would there be any conflict there between potentially reducing the accessibility or usability of the station and introducing another 3,500 houses in the vicinity?
Well, so I mean, there's quite a specific question within that in terms of that particular impact. I'm not sure I can answer that. The detail of that, of course, part of the evidence around Chase Park, key part is about the need to encourage sustainable access and sustainable modes and bus services particularly. It's likely that part of that strategy involves in finding ways through the detailed design, etc., to ensure that people use the bus services to their, as they need to sustain those services and encourage further services to come forwards. So it's likely that there is a consistency here. If you need something more specific on that, so we can come back to you on it. But Mr. Cole unfortunately isn't here this morning, who would be the person who I think would be able to answer that directly.
Thank you. Well, I'll consider if I think I need anything else. We'll obviously see what interested parties might have to say. I do say in your Regulation 22 statement, which is page B.455, and this is in response to some of the objections. It says, to mitigate the impact of car park closure, the plan includes provisions for enhancing accessible transport options and improving connections to the station. I just wondered if you could point me to the bit in the policy that does that. Is that what J is? I mean, J refers to obviously parking. You have something in this fairly standard phrase in infrastructure requirements 1 about improved highways to encourage sustainable travel, etc. But it's not generic. It's not specific to this site. So I just wondered if there is anything specific in this policy which would be seen as addressing the loss of parking in that way.
So I don't think there is an additional policy requirement that you've missed in your read through. Obviously, a requirement that is drafted perhaps fairly generically, but requires consideration on the detailed application of the relevant matters, is just as effective in directing decision makers to the mitigation that's needed. And that's really the question, is there going to be proper consideration and mitigation as necessary of any adverse impacts? And I think so. Our position would be that requirement 1 does that, notwithstanding that it's common to other allocations.
Well, thank you. I'm picking this up, obviously, in the other cases where heritage has been an issue. I've picked that up generally when we're going through the design requirements, but because of the just the nature of this one, and obviously we have someone here to speak to it. Obviously, heritage is another bone of contention. It refers to, in the table, refers to the station being a Grade 2 star listed building. Which obviously quite high significance, and the policy itself, again, albeit the plan, we know the statutory requirements related to that, and the plan as a whole related to that, but we've talked at length about consistency. The policy itself doesn't refer to heritage, as far as I can tell. So I guess because of the status of this building, Grade 2 star, if that's accurate, then what again, I suppose. And the proximity of the site to the building, it's whether or not it would be possible in principle, I think, to deliver is it possible in principle to deliver a scheme there for 52 dwellings, which wouldn't result in unacceptable harm. As I say, sometimes it's quite clear, between the proximity, the relationship to a site, to the heritage asset will be such that, I can have reasonable comfort that there's a scheme. It's not beyond the realms of fantasy that you can deliver a scheme that would not result in unacceptable harm, or that the public benefits might outweigh that harm. What we're talking about here is a site immediately adjacent to a Grade 2 star listed building. So, is there going to be inevitable less than substantial harm or substantial harm to that building? And if so, are 52 dwellings sufficient to, again, well, as we know, that test in national policy is about planning applications, but clearly if I come to the view that there's absolutely no way that test could be achieved or test could be passed, then it's probably not a sound policy. So I suppose the extent to which the council has assessed, because of the proximity relationship, that heritage impact would be quite useful to know.
Thank you, sir. I mean, in the hearing statement, it set out the principles, the design principles as developed, secure, amongst other things, respect for the setting of the listed Oakwood station. So That you'll see. I mean, you're right that there isn't a specific reference to the to that having to be taken into account in the decision, but you'll also see so there is reference to decreasing height towards the south and east site boundary, considering carefully its relationship. There are various things that talk about how the site should be designed. My understanding, perhaps Ms. Hope can say further, but in terms of that process of getting from 100 units that were being put forward by TfL to the 52 that we've identified, that's obviously a key consideration that's gone into that. It is obviously an important asset. I don't understand we have a specific heritage assessment document that's been produced in relation to it, but obviously the council's work has included input from heritage officers. Sorry? No.
Thank you, Inspector. I think we're perhaps missing Mr. Kennedy's presence this morning, but having spoken to Mr. Kennedy yesterday, there is some thinking around these types of schemes, and I just refer you to the Armos Grove scheme and the Cockfosters scheme, which are both Grade 2 listed stations with similar residential proposals. Having spoken to Mr. Kennedy, there is a thinking around the residential elements and the subsequent heights proposed and how they're going to be sympathetic to those listed developments. So there has been a thought process behind that. So there is an approach that we take at Enfield to provide some assurance to you that it is done in a sympathetic way.
Okay.
I'd also say so the council would be amenable, given the significance of the asset, this is a designated asset, to there being a specific reference to that within the design principles.
Yeah, I mean, given what some of the other policies do say, where I would say the asset either isn't as prominent in the setting, or sorry, the site isn't as prominent in the setting of those, or that perhaps the asset itself is not of such significance. It talks about heritage impacts there specifically. It seems, at least on the face of it, odd.
So I think we can accept it's an omission. It should be corrected.
So yes, okay. And I think actually that would fit into my next point was about, again, looking back at what the Reg 22 statement says in relation to some of the objections. There is, it does talk about the policy or the plan. I suppose it says in the statement, and it reflects this, the plan recognises the historical significance of, so it may be that if you read the plan as a whole, there are policies relating to that. Obviously, up until now, perhaps the policy doesn't do that, and I think for a grade 2, say grade 2 star.
Yes, I mean, of course, this is one other way of looking at it is that not only is the policy protecting this site, there's also a statutory duty, in fact. So, in a sense, this is one area where it couldn't lawfully be ignored.
No, quite, and that's always the odd. Say, just we can have. I like these little sort of, academic discussions sometimes about how planning works. But
Yes.
how the plan works clearly, on the face of it, you might consider it to be an omission. It doesn't talk about it, but clearly there are backstops and controls to make sure that heritage was never going to be ignored in the plan application. But it does come back to, I suppose, from the statute perspective, I suppose whether or not in allocating the site as the council had regard to its duty. That's the other consideration.
So I can certainly confirm that is the case. We've had regard to our duty into the heritage significance.
And I suppose that would be reflected by something being specific in the policy, which talks about how heritage is going to be considered. Just, sorry, Councillor, I just want to very quickly go through some of my other points on the policy, the infrastructure requirements and the policies and the design principles. There is a, on the infrastructure requirements, say some of these are quite standard. There is actually a suggested modification from via the agreement with TfL to the infrastructure requirements, which does talk about prioritising active travel and public transport connectivity. So that perhaps is a way of emphasising that, if nothing else. I thought 3 on infrastructure, again, should contribute towards biodiversity initiatives, creation of new habitats, rain gardens and plants within Trent Park. They're all very interesting. Again, very quite laudable, but novel. I don't think that one's come up before, so whenever I see something new, I just like to mention it, because it's well, where's that come from? But okay, no particular comment on that. But going back, obviously to the. I'm sorry to be stuck record, but clearly, all of these are dependent on the scheme and SIL regs and everything else. And also, just again, just a reminder, actually, because I've not talked about this for the first couple of days because we've talked about it so much. But at some point, obviously, the should versus must discussion. I'm not going to go through every single should and must to see which it should be for now. And I think at some point, I guess there'll be again action for the council to be clear where the must should be shoulds and vice versa, and then I can look at that and decide whether I agree with that or. But obviously, I would say just in terms of here you've got G, for example, is a should provide non-residential. I guess from what we've just discussed, that should be must, because you are requiring the non-residential. Must require dual aspect dwellings along the railway line, I would assume, if that's an absolute.
Yes, I wonder if the should provide there is not so much about should provide non-residential uses if those are going into the land use requirements, but it's more about them having to be alongside Bramley Road.
You say it's not. Yeah, it's just could just say the non-residential uses shall be provided along Bramley Road. Yeah. I think sometimes actually yes, it might not be should versus must. It might be is should or must the right language anyway to achieve what wants to achieve, and there are other ways of expressing it to make sure you achieve what you want to achieve. I think J is obviously important here. There is a suggested modification to J which talks about prioritise. So I think the suggested modification refers to it as being car free and reflecting the site's PTAL 6A. Yes. I'm conscious that we've talked about TfL have updated that, so I don't know. Obviously, I know you're looking into the updates, but the table obviously is PTAL 4, so I don't know which is accurate there. Is it 4? Is it 6A? Is it moot? Because if the purpose of it is to be car free, then it doesn't really matter if it's PTAL 4 or PTAL 6A. If the council's objective and TfL's objective is for it to be car free, it needs to be clear. But I suppose the question is, in this situation where it is an operational station, is car free suitable? Again, the suggested modification does refer to, and I think the policy might refer to it as well. Yes, it does refer to clearly accommodating practical requirements for accessibility, serving and drop-off needs. So there is some recognition there about the operational aspects of the station. So again, we've talked about parking before. The thing here, I guess, and thinking about it does obviously it refers to operational type issues, and we didn't necessarily get into this with Cock-Fosters, because it's a similar issue, I suppose, is whether the policy needs to be clear about the operational aspects. I mean, we did get into this Cock-Fosters because there was a particular operational issue around the drivers and their needs, but I suppose one thing we didn't, and as I said, when we talk about these sites, new things occur to you as you go through them, but not about whether the policy should be seeking to ensure the operational, the operation of the station is not prejudiced or impeded or affected in some negative way.
So I suppose there are a couple of ways it could be dealt with. One is to have a requirement ensuring that the operational the operation, as you set out, the operation of the station is not impeded. The other way, if and I think we know this at Cockfoss, I'm not sure about Oakwood, but we know at Cockfoss that some land will be needed for continued use with the station. I think what we suggested there was that actually needs to be part of the land use requirements, because it won't be connected to the residential development. It's a separate. I think it wouldn't be within the same planning unit. It wouldn't be functionally connected to it. It would be part essentially of the station. So if that's the case here, and I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but if that's the case here, then perhaps that would need to be a land use requirement. Conversely, if it's just about ensuring that whatever is done within the residential development doesn't prejudice the neighbouring development, then that's a sort of, that can also be done through the design principles.
The site is behind, so there's a very, very narrow, it has to be said, access into the car park. So that's one thing. But well, it's obviously, but it's usable. I suppose there's two aspects to the operational side of it as well. There's and I'm just think these are things that should occur to me now. One is from the parking, accessing, servicing, dropping off, which you've referred to, but also there is, of course, the agent of change principle, I suppose, as well, which is the idea of a wood residential development so close to an operational railway station avenue. Now, it's London. It probably is that everywhere anyway. So
it's a TfL promoted scheme in
exactly.
London. So
yeah.
I hope.
I understand well. and again, if you follow the logical, with respect to what the comments have been, if you follow the logical extension of, this is a TfL promoted scheme, if anyone understands how that might affect the operation of the station, it should be TfL. So there is that. But of course, what TfL think and want to achieve versus what the policy, making sure the policy is effective, is not necessarily the same thing. So, and obviously that's the making. If the site is sound in principle, then making sure the policy is effective and the council is able to control it properly, and that's the main thing. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, I've exhausted my comments. So, Councillor Sampson, any comments?
Thank you, sir. Could I just start by responding to some of the responses that you received to your questions? It was clear from what Mr. Dale Harris said that the council has no figures for the usage of this car park, and I say as well, I have no figures either, but I know from having lived in this area for 25 years that this car park is regularly full on during the working week and full at the weekends, and particularly so, and this is not a local curiosity, particularly so when there are Arsenal home matches. And during those days, the station, or the former station car parks, Cockfosters, Southgate, Oakwood are all full, and the parking spills out into the residential areas. And if we're talking about sustainable travel, we want those people to take the tube into Highbury, and so that's not having the car park there inhibits that sustainability. The other thing that was mentioned, Mrs. Rain mentioned that there is an adjacent car park to the one that's proposed, and she's quite correct. There is indeed an adjacent car park, but that car park probably has a capacity of about 20 spaces, and in no way compensates for the loss of the probably 140 spaces in the main car park under discussion. That adjacent car park is also, I'd suggest, a very difficult car park in which to park, partly because some of the spaces are always taken up by the Oakwood Cars minicab service, and also because of the bus stops immediately adjacent to that car park. If you want to park in that front car park, you've got to negotiate the buses parking at the bus stop, and once you've done that, you have to cross the road, the slipway, to get to the station where buses are driving and other vehicles doing their drop-off. And just as this sounds like a minor matter, but Councillor O'Halloran and I have had regular correspondence from residents complaining about water pooling, rainwater pooling at the front of the station. That's just a function of pavements and what have you. So not only will people who park in that adjacent car park have to negotiate the cars dropping off, the buses stopping, they will also have to negotiate in adverse weather large puddles of rain. So that is not a conducive area in which to park. And I'd like to turn now to some of the Council's responses to your written questions, particularly paragraph 3 to 4, where the Council has said the site proposed for residential development is on part of the existing car park. You'll know that's not the case. It's not part of the existing car park. It's the entirety of the existing car park. And I was somewhat nonplussed by the response in paragraph 319, the last sentence, when, as you're right, you were talking about car parking, where the Council says, any car park reprovision or mitigation related to station access will be addressed through the development of the development management process. Now, I know we've discussed that, and I know that's, to me, at this stage, a somewhat opaque process. I'm assuming that that will mean that there will be no parking for residents of proposed new development, and any parking provision at all will be restricted by, as we've looked at, design principle J, limited to drop-off, servicing and accessible bays. And I believe that's been agreed with TfL in their statement of common ground. And so, seeing through the glass darkly and looking forward, I'm imagining that during a planning process, additional blue badge spaces might be offered as part of that design process. But it's my contention that that merges the needs of blue badge holders with other residents, other transport users who may not hold a blue badge, but who equally need access to that station and need that car park. I mean, the assumption that giving blue badge spaces solves the disability access problem is erroneous. And just to give an example, my own wife had a knee replacement, and for the year before her operation and for the year after her operation, she chose to use Oakwood Station because it is, as we know, the only station in between here and Finsbury Park that has level access from street to train. She chose to use that station. She wasn't entitled to a blue badge, and in order to facilitate her using that station, we had to use the car park, because if you can't use the car park, you can't get at the train. And you'll know from your own visit there that Oakwood Station doesn't exist in a residential area of 360 degrees around it. Immediately facing it is Trent Park, and so for approximately 140 degrees looking away from the station, there is no parking. The other 40 degrees in Cockfosters, you're quite quickly into the Cockfosters station controlled parking zone. So that's difficult. If you look behind the station, you have to go, I think it's 0.3 miles before you're out of the Oakwood Station controlled parking zone, and then you would have to walk 0.8 of a mile, generally up a hill, to get to the station. That is not an attractive prospect for somebody who is not a blue badge holder, but is a little perhaps uncertain on their pins. That is really a hard ask for them. And if TfL were here, I'd be asking the question, given the investment that has been made in Oakwood Station to have a lift installed there that goes from the ticket hall to train level, what was the point of that investment if the very people for whom it was intended can no longer access that station because there is no longer the car park there? just to wrap up on your own observations about heritage, this station is on a hill, it's on the ridge, it's visible from a considerable distance. That is part of the design feature. Any intrusion on that, I know we've reduced from 100 to 52, will detract from the heritage value of that view. That, I think, is a fundamental. I've talked about the needs of disabled users, not necessarily those holding blue badges, but of course the other members of the travelling public will of course be inconvenienced, doubly inconvenienced because of the loss of the car park at Cockfosters, trebly inconvenienced because of the loss of the car park at Arnos Grove. And so that's why I would submit to you that this was not a sound site and that the infrastructure considerations had not been fully taken into account.
Thank you. So quite a few points there. I don't wish to respond to Mr. Dale Harris or your team.
So, I mean, in terms of accessibility, obviously the policies seek to ensure that the needs of specific groups, particularly blue badge holders, are addressed appropriately in accordance with the relevant standards. It is a high PTAL location. We also don't know exactly how high, and that reflects bus services as well to the station. I don't think we have. Well, we don't have figures on these, so I can't come back on anything there. Obviously, if you need further comment from Mr. Cole, we can provide that to you. I mean, this particular need to access Arsenal. Well, there's a whole range of policies operating across North London to ensure that access to train stations is taken by sustainable modes. I don't think it's suggested that the alternative is that people are going to drive to Highbury, because obviously a lot of restrictions there to stop people parking. As someone who lives near Finsbury Park, I'm well aware of those. So in terms of sustainable transport, there's a raft of policies to support the proposition that reducing car parking is part of a strategy to encourage use of accessible modes. I can't respond to the points particularly directed at TfL. They're not here. But as the matter statement records, there have been discussions with them, and any car park reprovision or mitigation that is required is envisaged to be addressed through the development management process. So, we're happy, as I think we've already discussed, to address that, to put something specific in on the design principle side. That's different, I think, to the particular point about what will be needed.
Yeah, I think J is, I know it's got some reference to operational sides, dropping off and access, but I think, yes.
J is about the homes.
And it's primarily about, and say 319 does talk about reprovision. So there have been discussions about reprovision.
It's any, so it's not saying that reprovision is needed.
Mm. But the policy may need to refer to that, but that's something for me to give some thought to.
Yes, I think it may be addressed by the additional infrastructure requirement. Improve access to Oakwood Station. Maybe we need additional language along the lines of ensuring consideration of impact on all users or something of that sort. But we can take that away, sir.
Okay, and then there are obviously some points you may, if there are any points you wish to respond to in terms of the heritage issues and the prominence of the building and how that might be undermined. The design principles do have some references. Tall buildings not considered acceptable, but a tall building is, I think we ascertained, it's 21 metres in this plan's parlance. So I think a 5-6 story building could still be implemented. It's not a tall building. So the question would be, given the relative height of the station and the local topography, whether because in other places in the plan, again, I'm not saying this is what has to happen here, but in other places in the plan, even below the tall building designation, the policy has said, buildings no more than 15 metres, no more than 18 metres. That has, for if you like, good reason, has provided a limit even below tall buildings. Now, again, I suppose this might be just a question of whether such an approach here would be appropriate, given that the nature of that building and the height of that building. Obviously, I could see, from certain viewpoints, if I'm just looking at, if there was a building emerging from behind, the square sort of small tower of, it's not a tower per se, sort of the prominence of the thing, that might be something to bear in mind. I don't know, but I mean those things are open to the council.
Yes, I mean, if there's a design principle that goes in that specifically requires consideration of the impact on Oakwood Station, that obviously would flow through, as it will in any event due to the statutory duty. I'd note, sir, that as we say at 317 of the hearing statement, the typology chosen for modelling how many units might be delivered is the Ryle Yard typology. I think that's within. Detail on that is within the character of growth study, I think. Not sure we've got the right reference, but let me just. But it's to ensure a modest, contextually sensitive form of development. I think we can just look up for you what the sort of sizes of buildings anticipated there are. But
it's all right. I've got that. I can look that up.
Yeah.
Inspector, just to follow up. For consistency more than anything, it does make sense to add the criteria that states that the buildings must be carefully considered in terms of their impact on heritage, and it's logical to include the 15-metre restriction.
The one other point, and again, it all flows from the same issue about loss of parking, but it is if again, a particular characteristic of this station is that it's the only one in the vicinity that has level access, and so that does give it a difference to some of the other stations. Is that, again, do you think that has any bearing on the principle of losing parking or reducing parking here? I mean, I would say, just again, slightly academic point, clearly. Sorry, it's not an academic point. What I'm saying is that my academic point was parking in an urban area, on the face of it, it often takes up quite a large amount of space, it's quite inefficient use, it's brownfield land. It might, again, playing devil's advocate, it might, on the face of it, seem like it's a reasonable opportunity to, make more efficient use of the land, also in the context of national and local policy to, try and reduce the need to travel and, promote more sustainable forms of transport. So there's a bit of a tension there, isn't then retaining parking, but so thinking, right, is there something specific about this car park that makes it special? Let's make it, so it's got a function that is more than just convenience.
I'd just like to endorse that point, and
it's not. I pose it as a question rather than
I'd reiterate your question, and we're all aware that if you look at a tube map, this station is highlighted with a specific logo. So TfL know the advantages of this station, and as I said before, this is not a blue badge issue. This is an issue that any member of the travelling public who just feels that they're not so steady on their pins and they don't want to take the stairs. That's who it is. And to that extent, this is a station that's different from Cockfosters, different from Alness Grove?
I feel like that's probably one we'd want to take away for Mr. Cole to address. I can't make any assumptions about neighbouring stations and their accessibility. So we'd perhaps come back to that, but I don't know if Mr. Dale Harris has got any further points to add.
No, sir.
Okay, well, I'll leave that with me. And if I want, I mean, obviously these are things that I can come to review to myself and put them in my, if I require any further actions, or if I require any further information or have some actions in relation to that, then I can set that out in my advice note in due course. Okay, thank you. Anything else you want to say before don't never leave the room without saying almost anything you want to say. Okay, thank you for your
very kind. Thank you.
Thank you for your contributions. It's very helpful. I'll just give you a moment to, if you are, unless you want to stay, but I will give you a moment to pack up and we'll move on. Thank you. Right. So if we go back, I think if we do. Just for ease, if we do it chronologically, so we go back to the first site on my list of for today's agenda is URB 18, land at Ritz Parade. Just have to make sure I'm looking at the right ones now. So again, the land use requirement talks about redevelopment of the site should deliver new homes. Should deliver, not will deliver, must deliver, expects to deliver. And then there is in the table below, it does talk about some re-provision of non-residential floor space. So when you look at those two lines together, it's not giving you a lot of certainty about what it is actually is being allocated for. So some clarity there. But again, if you're just sort of explaining that again with the status and everything else, would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. On that point, yes, it should. The land use requirement should refer to re-providing Class E. Is this a local parade of shops?
It is, yes, an existing local parade of.
So the site, just to help you, well, you probably already spotted. I think it is adjacent to URB 16. So it's next to it, and I understand these two sites. It's not a point we mentioned when we were talking about URB 16, but both of them are the allocations that have flowed through from the North Circular Action Plan. So they have their sort of legacy allocations in that sense. Miss Hope, I think, is going to run through, but I'd flag there's also one other modification on this one, so that the heritage considerations are coloured red, but should be amber. Right. Because they're just referring to the locally listed building.
Yes, I did pick up on that actually. Yes. Okay. Well, yes, existing building is locally. Yeah. Well. Okay. I've got a question or two about that, I suppose. But you can explain the sort of logic, and I guess if if the site existing building is a locally listed building, is the policy seeking to retain that building or redevelop it? There is reference, I think, to retain. So it does say A is retain and restore the Ritz Parade and Assembly Hall. So I think even there's some a little bit confused. The land use requirement ought to be explaining that, because it just says redevelopment of the site should have new homes, but you say well, actually how much of that site is being redeveloped, because and I can't, and obviously I don't know the site as well as you, the council, but which part of that inset is the retained, because the dotted lines appear to, if I helpfully look back at UR16, so I can actually see they just seem to be the outline of the buildings that are already there. So it's all a bit unclear. So perhaps, yes, some clarity. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. So the locally listed building is the bigger building within the three polygons. The one in the middle is the locally listed building. It's the Jehovah's Witness Community Hall at the moment. So the site was submitted it came through as a call for sites, and Mr. Dale Harris mentioned it's a legacy site from the North Circular Area Action Plan, which was adopted in 2016. Owned by Notting Hill Genesis. We've applied a Brentford Lock West typology to ensure that the built form is sympathetic to the site's transitional context. It's adjacent to low-rise residential neighbourhood and basically Bowes Road, like the A406, is quite a busy east-west road connecting the borough. Did mention a locally listed building. At the moment, we've kind of proposed 71 homes within the 5 to 10 year bracket, noting that the 71 homes needs to be included within the land use requirements. There's no current planning application or discussions at the moment, and we're proposing to perhaps move it into the 10 plus years. And as Mr. Dale Harris mentioned, it's adjacent, quite nearby to 16 Bowes Road. 188-200 Bowes Road.
Okay, the inset map, I guess, if needs to be amended, presumably, because the orange dot or pink, whatever colour that's supposed to be, salmon, dotted line around the retained local list building, which is seeking to be retained, does suggest that I think that denotes an infill opportunity in the key, as I recall. So
I'm not sure. So a pink is retention of existing building.
Oh, is it? Oh.
Orange is infill opportunity.
Sorry.
I have to confess that I'm not heavily, but I'm mildly colourblind.
Well, I say
I'm right at the very far extent of my colour sensitivity here, but
yes.
Those two colours are
when
helpfully close.
you see it in the key, you can tell the difference. When you're looking at it just on the face of it, and I've spent several days looking at orange dotted lines, they look suspiciously similar. Okay, fair enough. That's fine. That's okay. I guess you didn't need to just if it's. What's also a little confusing is you've put a dotted line around the footprint of those buildings, which are probably on the OS base, and then deleted them from the OS base, which you probably didn't need to do, I suspect.
I totally agree.
It does rather suggest you're talking about redeveloping them if you remove them from the OS base.
Totally agreed. So I think we've kind of proposed amendments to the inset maps, and maybe just to include a small key somewhere on the page to notes, to remind the user what the salmon pink lines are and what the orange pink lines are.
Yeah, quite. Well, a key would, yes, probably handy. But I think returning the ordnance survey base map to its proper form would probably be just to remove any doubt. That, because obviously that is a little confusing, slightly confusing to me, although perhaps I was again. The colours are quite similar, but fair enough. I understand. So the 71 dwellings then is actually in a very small. We're looking at the inset map, and again, I better keep double checking the key. Is they hatched it? Is that where is the actual
hatching? I think is non-residential.
The non-residential use. So to the right. So where's the actual opportunity coming from? Oh, are they supposed to be different colours? On there, they look to me.
I think they are the same colour. They appear to be the same colour on the inset map, but they probably do need to be separate colours just to distinguish between the existing and what you're looking to develop.
Right. Okay. So yeah, because this is yeah. So just to be absolutely certain, the two rectangular buildings or outlines fronting onto the road are the infill opportunities.
Yeah.
The larger building that goes into the back land, that is to be retained.
Yes, that's as I understand it. Thank you, sir.
Because those colours, deliberately or not, those colours are identical. Yeah, I did actually write. I was saying, if the dotted lines are retention or infill, because I obviously couldn't tell, so where is the opportunity for 71 dwellings? So if the opportunity for 71 dwellings are the two, so it's removing the frontage buildings. Have a look at the.
So the supporting text in our hearing statement and the points of the policy make no reference to retaining the frontages, those frontage buildings. So I think it looks likely that those are intended for redevelopment. I should just flag, so I think there's one other thing on the, there's an active frontage line behind the eastern of the two frontage buildings.
Mm.
I don't know if that's suggesting that there's a missing infill development opportunity sitting behind that. I think so we're going to have to clarify.
I think there's clearly an action to make sure the inset map is actually, again, reflecting what the policy. So I think that's just straightforward. I mean, it's quite clear that the inset map, which is in effect, albeit illustrative, is obviously part of the plan, needs to be accurate, and so that's the action.
Mr. Brown, I think wanted to chip in.
Yeah, the land behind the frontage, which looks like an active frontage, or the blue line on the inset map, is actually partly a car park at the moment. So that probably should be an infill opportunity as well on the inset map. We'll have, yeah.
Okay. I mean, they're obviously, yeah, these are illustrative and so on, but yeah, need to be clear if they're going to be in there. Fine. Okay. So at least I now understand, at least as much as I can, that what is to be retained and what is, so basically the remainder is up for grabs, provided the building is retained. Okay.
Yes, and I think, again, just in the hearing statement, the matter statement, we've referred to the site capacity being based on the Brentford Lock West typology to reduce net developable area, accounting for the retention of the politically listed building. So that, again, suggests that essentially everything's up for development except for the locally listed building.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we've done the status of that. We know it's going to be moved into, or should we have, it's not a deliverable. There's no deliverable scheme, and I guess nothing to suggest it's going to come forward in 5 years. It's a local, as we talked about yesterday or Tuesday, it's as a locally listed building, it doesn't have the same status, and so as you say, the effect on the locally listed, non-designated asset is to have regard to its significance, so on and so forth. So I suppose there is a matter of principle here, broadly, in terms of whether the effect, but because of the nature of that, it's possibly something that can be dealt with through the DM process rather than a matter of principle. Whereas I think the last site is more of a matter of principle, given it's just as a matter of just comparing and contrasting those things. There are two very different outcomes, even though this site, the infill opportunities are just as close to the locally listed building. The fact it's a locally listed building rather than a grade 2 star listed building is obviously material. I'm just going to go through. Now I understand a bit more about the actual proposal. I'm just going to go through the usual issues. I don't think there's anything to say about too much about the infrastructure requirements. Again, other than I understand Thames Water or the EA have referred to this being an SPZ, so it's just the usual issues there. And then there's the usual reference to the active travel mod, which either may or may not be necessary. I'm sure the plan as a whole is not going to ignore the fact that active travel is important, but whether or not it's needed in every single allocation is for me to determine, or maybe for you to suggest. The I guess H should locate non-residential uses along Bowes Road. I guess actually if then the land use requirement is going to be updated to deliver or re-provide, then it wouldn't be, well, again, as Mr. Dalhousie said, it might not be should or must, it might just be the non-residential uses will be located along Bowes Road on H. Parking, we're into the realms of minimising parking. This is PTEL 4, so it may well be again that you're content with whatever the London plan says about PTEL 4. That's for you to just be content with. But at least I think reference to the London plan, if that is the case, is sensible. There's nothing, again, for consistency's sake, there is nothing here about living conditions of existing people. Again, it may be that because of the nature of the surrounding uses, it might not be a factor. It looks like there's open space to the rear. If it's other commercial uses either side, then that might be perfectly valid. I just raise it because it's not mentioned, but that might be perfectly justifiable here because it's a commercial area. Might not unlikely to affect people on the opposite side of that busy road, so that's fine. There is no specific reference apart from retaining and restoring the Ritz Parade and Assembly Hall. It doesn't talk about anywhere about the effect of the infill development on the non-designated asset. And again, just for completeness, I would suggest that might be something that's needed, albeit perhaps without the same level of reflecting the national policy.
Indeed, sir. We won't use the language that is proper to designated assets.
I think that's all I have on that one. I think I would say I'm a bit more understanding of that one. Any more comments on that before we move on? So we'll go on then to URB 19, Albany Leisure Centre. I know this is one of the ones where you may or may not, after the discussion on Tuesday, wish to potentially talk about a change in approach. So we may as well start on that basis and see where we are with it.
Thank you, sir. So URB 19, I think so. It's probably first useful just to clarify a couple of points about what the allocation is for. So you may have noticed that there's within the land use requirements there's a reference to 30 extra care homes, but then within the implementation there's 85 housing units. Well, yes, indeed, sir. So the origin of this proposal is it was put forward, a proposal within the red line area as shown on the plan was put forward by London Borough and Enfield Property Services through the call for sites, proposing essentially redevelopment of the existing leisure centre to provide a new leisure centre with 85 homes above it. Later at Reg 18, there was a representation also bringing into question the possibility of redeveloping the car park, which you can see on the inset plan to the north of the leisure centre. It's across the road essentially. And the suggestion there was that's where the 30 extra care home units come from. But promoted as a comprehensive redevelopment because it's the car park that relates to the leisure centre.
In the north.
Sorry?
That's open land, isn't it? Is that where is that if it's to the north?
It's to the north, but it's an already developed site. It's a built-up car park there.
Okay, but it is metropolitan overgrown.
It is so, yes, but it's
It also appears to be outside the red line. But
it is outside the red line, but again, so I'm just explaining where. No, I'm trying to explain where the different references come from. So we understand that there was that was a high-level proposal at that point from Property Services. Since then, and at that point, the leisure centre hadn't had much investment for a long period of time, and there were various kind of issues with it. Since that time, there's been significant further investment in that leisure centre. It's now performing at the top of the council's different leisure centres in terms of satisfaction and so forth. That's and essentially, as a result of that, there's no corporate plan to redevelop it. And essentially, we understand, so no real feasibility in financial terms of doing so, because a redevelopment would cost, we understand, in north of £10 million. And there simply isn't funding available to do that. So that's why the council as planning authority is now not convinced that this site is deliverable. We don't have an objection to it in planning policy terms, but so we don't think it's likely that this will come forward within the plan period. And that's really what we're flagging here, sir.
Okay.
The allocation would, in any event, not the 30 extra care home units. That wouldn't be something that should come out of the policy in any event. Insofar as any proposal might come forward for 30 extra care homes on that site to the north, firstly, it would be below the site threshold for allocation. There's obviously a metropolitan open land issue, and we do have policies, policy H5, I think it is, that specifically deals with extra care provision. So we're not proposing any amendments to put that into the plan. That can be dealt with outside of the plan through DM policies as necessary.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know where these things leave me, really, in a way. It may well be, obviously, looking at each of these things in turn. I think it's another one we're going to be talking about today where I think the council may have changed its position, or we'll come on to that. They're each to be looked at on their own merits, and the reasons are different every time. And it might well be the conclusion about URB 21 is different to this one. I know you're going away to do some further work on URB 21. I think, 01. Yeah.
Grimsdown Sports.
Grimsdown Sports. I don't know where I've got URB.
That's one. We began with it. If you remember on
yes.
Tuesday.
I don't know where I got the 21 from.
So there's also
But anyway, yes, there's that. So this might be different. Obviously, it's similar in a way in that it's been put forward by the council. The council is the landowner. Council is, both, so driving this about the vision for the city district, and delivering as much housing as possible, maximising, etc., but also recognising that sometimes the world moves on now. On URB 1, it seems different. It's based on emerging evidence I haven't seen, so that's relevant. This sounds like it's more to do with the fact that decisions have been made by the council, perfectly legitimate, I'm sure, to invest in one of its assets, and that investment has then altered, and it's more of the world has simply moved on, and that it's no longer an available opportunity. I suppose the question would be, is it unsound to have an allocation in place that would, if in the event that an application came forward, would at least provide the framework within which, you know, to consider an application, but without relying on the 85 dwellings in any way to be part of the supply. But you've got a framework now. Again, that could be the case, but does it serve a purpose?
Yes, I mean, I think the reason we put forward our position as being that we don't support the allocation is on the basis that, given that doesn't seem to be an available opportunity, we wouldn't have put it in the plan in the first place. If that had been the position as we understood it at the time when we were drafting. We certainly wouldn't seek to rely on the 85 units through our trajectory. I don't think that would be sound. And I'm you know, so in terms of the test of soundness, the policy is effective, potentially, in that it would help guide development. But its justification, where there is no evidence to suggest really that it's going to come forwards. So I think on balance we'd say that it's not justified in those circumstances. So that's why we've suggested removing the allocation. Justification is clearly a matter of planning judgment as much as anything else. So we don't put our case any higher than I have done on that. It is all dependent on really there just being no it's not just about corporate will, but it's also about just feasibility, because there's been investment, and it's clearly the kind of development, unlike what we were looking at Brimstown Sports Ground, where you're talking about a redevelopment where you're putting in a valuable land use to cross-subsidise development. This is a very expensive investment, even with 85 flats above. So it is a different kind of category from that perspective.
Okay, I think that's to leave with me. I don't think there's any point going through my normal discussions about the infrastructure requirements and design principles, not least because if I were to conclude the site was to stay in for whatever reason, then, and it is sound in principle, then I guess the action would be, these action is now fairly familiar. I don't think there's anything jumping out that from my sort of general questions, particularly now you've explained the whole extra care, that would have to change anyway, and all that. The rest of it is really, what is sort of the general things we've been talking about. So it's probably not really going to get us anywhere talking about all those things. And I can take away what you've said. I mean, again, clearly as well, 85 dwellings versus several hundred dwellings. The significance and the relevance and the importance of the overall supply and delivery is obviously of a different order as well here. So that's also going to be material, I think, to thinking. Okay, so thank you for that. We'll move on. Obviously, I'll come back in due course. In terms of the trajectory, in bearing in mind that it may be the case that by the time we've got the trajectory and you're working on stage 3, I'm not necessarily going to advise, because I don't particularly want to advise in a piecemeal way unless I might decide it's just for easy to do in some cases, not others. But if you start coming to a final conclusion on some sites and others, it might set hairs running unnecessarily, when people make assumptions that aren't valid. So I haven't quite decided how I'm going to play that yet. But obviously, from the purposes of the trajectory, I think, as I said about some of the other sites, they should be in the list. They should still be listed, but perhaps with a 0 there, so at least I can understand. And obviously, there'd be a brackets, asterisk, whatever you want to say, with the dwellings, 85. So if the site stays in, I would be adding 85 at some point, but if the site comes out, at least that's where the position is. That's the council's position on the trajectory. It would no longer be counting.
Thank you. So yes, we'll be careful just to record it all in a usable format.
Yeah. So as long as they know, again, so the list, if you like, of allocations is as submitted, even if the capacities have changed. At least then, even if lines are being drawn through them at some point because they're complete. Because obviously they're complete, they're still in the trajectory, just be shown as complete. Or if it's
Yes,
occurring.
maybe in the 1 to 0 to 5 period, or yeah.
Yeah. The other site we were talking about, the
Middlesex University.
There's university, and there was the former hotel.
Chase
on the
Hotel,
Chase
Royal Chase Hotel.
Yeah, if there's only a few left of those, or we're not quite sure. You know, they're still obviously there, but it's just showing what's being developed. Yeah, so that's that. So we'll move on. Sorry, thank you. We'll move on then to OB20. How is it? We'll do a couple more, I'm sure. Cuckoo Lane Estate. Here we have, I guess, I mean, it's 15 hectares, but 59 dwellings. So I assume we're in the same sort of discussions as Mr. Kennedy was talking about yesterday, and the same provenance and gestation and so on.
That's right. So yes, it emerges essentially from the same sort of work stream within the regen team, and I think all of what Mr. Kennedy said yesterday in relation to those projects and where it's got to will apply to this site and some others that we're coming on to. I don't know who wants to talk to this one, but we've got, if you look at the inset plan, so you can see we've got. There are a number of orange hatched areas, or not hatched areas, orange outline areas, particularly near Nottingham Road and in that northern area. But there are sort of various points at the end of blocks or on underused amenity space within the site. And I think the same point in terms of you can also see that there are a broader transport links and other improvements across the estate. So again, this is one so where the same point would apply in terms of what we think might be necessary in terms of a reference to project brief, master planning, and also qualification that not every piece of development needs to deliver everything, but that all needs to be thought about and delivered holistically.
Quite. So, but again, I'm just going to assume on this basis, it's currently in what would be the 5-year supply. Is it going to be moved? You know, again, very, very slightly nervous about some of this, but I'm sure we'll be discussing it at length.
Inspector, can I just add?
Yeah.
There's no planning status at the moment, so discussions are being had with our housing and regen team. Initial feasibility studies have been undertaken, but it's not in the planning pipeline yet. So again, it's in the 5 to 10 years. So we're proposing that it gets moved into the 10 plus years.
Okay. To go forward a little bit. Yeah, no modifications for this one. We are into the again general sort of areas of consistency now. I think I'll just say that on this, and this is one where it says no to flood zones, but the EA have picked it up as a flood zone 2 and 3. I think I would have checked, I did recheck the topic paper to make sure it's been adequately addressed, but it may be something that needs to be referred to. I mean, again, it probably has reflected on this because J does talk about SUDs and flood risks, so you probably, in drafting the policy, understood the flooding, but the active table is possibly inaccurate.
Yes, yeah, I can see it's in flood zone 2, so yeah.
Then I know here this is one where again you sort of doesn't say that tall buildings are not appropriate. You know, well, okay, does it need to? Possibly not, but it does talk about 15-metre height being suitable. So I guess that really just goes back to the discussion we were talking about. You know, it's not outside the scope of the plan to set these sort of constraints below the tall building threshold. we say there's no suggested modification on parking, but this does use the sort of standard text about minimising parking. So again, it's going to be consistency reference to London Plan. This is PTEL 0 to 1A, so it would actually allow the London, well, based on current, I think it's 0 to 1A, so it would allow quite generous parking. So again, the question is that are you content that minimise means the London Plan standards, or is it something more than that? Question mark. I mean, that's again for you to make sure you're consistent and effective. And then it's just generally, again, other consistency things, no reference to living conditions of existing residents. Again, consistency issue, as we talked yesterday, there might be different ways of addressing that consistency issue, but I flag it up. It might be adding something to this policy or taking them out of other policies. And then it does talk about, again, the within a protected viewing corridor, it says, yes, view to King's Head Hill. Now, it might be that's why there's a restriction of 15 metres on the buildings there, but some, I guess, again, reference or cross-reference or something to the long view policy or the important views policy might be instructive to reduce any ambiguity or...
All noted. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, we'll do one more. So URB 23, I think. Another estate. There's, again, I assume very similar issues, no scheme, 10 years plus, so on and so forth. Just on this, I was just looking at the inset map. The infill opportunities do appear to be both very small, but also it's very limited. I take the point that some of these are putting red lines around them to highlight where improvements might be made to the estate. Whether or not some of these improvements are going to be justified by the delivery of 42 dwellings and in those sort of areas, but that might be something for you and your DM colleagues to worry about when the planning application comes in. But you can have an aspiration for these things, but whether you can, again, if it's London, if it's Enfield Estates Department or Property Department driving these things forward, then I guess it's a different. You would expect them to want to be delivering these things, so that's a different. It's so aspirational. That's fine. I did seem though on one of those infill opportunities, is it actually referred to in the policy? Whether it was there's one that's surrounded by what I think is referred to as sensitive edge, this red squiggly line, and I wasn't sure if that was some kind of existing community use or something. So
that is currently occupied by the Bolin Community Hall, which is still used and not surplus to requirement. So the policy should refer to, the land use requirement should refer to re-provision of community use as appropriate. And that's been taken into account in calculating the 42. I think so. There's a sort of mix. There's the community hall, and then possibly there's also some garaging. The one on the western side is, I think, all garaging that's to be redeveloped essentially. And I think there's some also on the other one, but it's principally that site is currently occupied by a community hall, which I think is in need of improvement, but used. So I think what we're showing there is a to demolish and redevelop, because it's got a different alignment and so forth.
Yes. Well, again, yes. If that's logical, it's fine. The Okay, right. So we'll look at the infrastructure requirements again. Just on this one, actually, I missed. I might have already missed one reference to the Albany Park Restoration Flood Alleviation Scheme today, but I know we've talked about it before. So that's so 3 would go. I think I spotted another one from today. So if I've already overlooked that one, I'm sure you'll pick that up. And then again, there's a suggested new active travel, connectivity, etc., criterion, which is, fine as far as it goes. Whether it needs to be there or not, I don't know, but we'll have to decide. And that, again, it is an SPZ, apparently, in an SPZ, so that's something to factor in. The one thing that I wanted, and again, I'm not getting into the shoulds and musts on all this too much. Presumably, there's nothing in there. I don't think I picked up anything there about the non-residential use or how, it might be that you're, again, agnostic to where, or ambivalent, whatever the correct word is, to where any replacement community facility should go, or I guess maybe the only opportunity is to re-provide it as part of the infill development. So, but the policies do tend to give some guidance on the provision of non-residential floor space and where it should go and so on. So maybe needs to be factored in. As you say, if it's in the land use requirement, then that maybe there's no need to refer to it in this, but it's, again, for you to...
Yes, thanks. I think it will depend on whether there's a view as to the sensitivity of its location or the importance of it locating somewhere particularly.
So if it's
within the red line area and that's fine, then that's a different point.
The simple fact that it says if re-provide if necessary, then that's fine. That's fine. And then the other thing I just wanted to pick up on this one is the new criteria. There's a suggested new criterion about streetscape improvements must be designed in collaboration with TfL, particularly affecting the A10. Okay, but the key thing I think here is there must be no direct vehicle access to parking or servicing from the A10 to ensure safety and compliance with strategic transport priorities. So of course, first question is, bearing in mind where the infill opportunities are, is that likely to be a factor anyway? Is anyone going to be suggesting that there is going to be no access from the A10? Question.
No, there isn't, sir.
It's a belt and braces thing, maybe, but if it's not. But my more substantive point on this goes back to the sort of, we keep coming back to the access on the A10. I suppose I'm still every time I read that I'm taken back to the RUR1 and indeed the crematorium, although that might be a moot point now. But the other sites where, well, certainly those two sites, RUR1 and the crematorium site, which the number escapes me just for now, they are to be accessed off the A10, and so we've still clearly got an issue with that. So that's to be resolved, I suppose.
Thank you, sir. Just to clarify, that will be resolved through the forthcoming statement of common ground with TfL.
I would probably suggest on the face of it, the new criterion, without, I've not been necessarily giving my views on all of these suggested mods, but I think for the purposes of just on this one, I don't see why I would be necessary. It's general road safety issues to be picked up through any application. If there's very little chance of, or very, if there's particularly if there's already an access off the A10 into the estate, you would assume it would be, it's not going to be a new access for 42 dwellings. So general highway safety issues can be addressed, I would say, without that that belt and braces isn't really needed here. It might be in other places, but not here, I would think. So that's my view on that. I think again, probably just so that the only other point would be living conditions issues and whether or not those are a factor. given its infill development and what we've said. And again, I guess the master plan approach, even though it's only 2 small opportunities, I guess you'd still be wanting to have that principle if that's relevant to all of the estate regeneration schemes. And also I think this site is actually adjacent, or one of the infill opportunities is adjacent to a petrol filling station, which will give its own particular issues in relation to living conditions and indeed perhaps agent of change, although whether you need to refer to that in every policy, probably not, but it's still a factor, I imagine. So I think, yeah, but it all comes back to consistency and so on. So. So, gain some actions there. I think we'll take the opportunity to have a little break now. So it's 5 past. So if we come back at 25 past, then have 20 minutes. Sorry, is there something?
Sorry, Inspector, can I just add, just on the hearing programme, there is no HERB 24. The site was actually covered with PL3 discussions.
I realised that when my agenda doesn't have it, because, yeah, I realised that I'd just got into autopilot mode, obviously, and then I noted that I'd put that in erroneously, so apologies for that. It's RUR03 or no, it's one of the PL, it's the one of placemaking areas, isn't it? Yeah, it's I think PL3. Yeah. So apologies, but yes, my agenda certainly doesn't have it on it. So I think when we come back at 25 past, we'll go into URB 25, and you can tell me whether that's Pevensey or Pevensey or whatever. So okay, so 25 past. Thank you. We'll make a start. So we're moving on to URB 25, Pevensey Avenue Estate, or just Pevensey Avenue, I should say. So 36 dwellings, 0.7 hectares, another infill scheme. So anything you want to tell me about this one? It's quite a small scale.
Thank you, sir. Similar to the other housing estates we've been discussing, again, feasibility work has been undertaken by the council based on 36 units of infill opportunity. At this time, it's the orange dotted lines on the plan. There aren't any kind of current planning applications being discussed at the moment. So we're proposing that the 36 units gets moved in from 5 to 10 years into the 10 plus years. And the sites within the council's ownership.
Okay, thank you. I think, where are we, 25, there's no modifications to this one. I think I've got very little, there's no modifications proposed. Generally speaking on this, again, it's in a source protection zone, apparently. And there are no, again, there'll be consistency issues throughout the infrastructure requirements that will need to be addressed in time. And there's the majority of the development sites are shoulds rather than musts, so again, something to look at in the fullness of time. But the only things I have to refer to again are the policy, sorry, the information reg rating refers to designated, within the setting of designated and non-designated assets. So again, it might be useful to point out what they are, and rather than, again, I think if, again, probably, and again, just to be mindful of this when making modifications. It's not probably enough just to refer to heritage, where it's to make it, to have a point to these allocations, obviously being specific about which assets they are and where they are and how they should be addressed. It's not just me saying, well, I perhaps should make this clear. It's not saying, have regard to heritage. It will be saying, have regard to the setting of this building or these buildings and being clear about what they are.
Thank you, sir, and noted. So it's the Jolly Butcher's Pub and Edward House within the setting of these heritage assets.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's I suppose I should have made that clear at the start, really. When I keep talking about the asset, and sometimes it does, but I think being specific is important. And again, I suppose, the living conditions issue, how that's dealt with, but it's not dealt with here. So that's the normal, all normal course of events and the usual issues around parking and so on and so forth. So, but I had very little to say about that one. So unless you've anything to say. Okay.
Nothing further. Thank you.
So we're just shuffling the deck chairs.
You're not suggesting.
I'm not suggesting anything.
This is the Titanic.
Absolutely not. Can't resist a phrase, that's all.
No, well, I'm as bad. You've told my wife I can't resist it myself. I'm awash with cliches myself. Right. So moving on then to Fords Grove Car Park, URB 26. 29 dwellings on 0.24 hectares. So only just, I have to remind myself of the threshold, 0.25 hectares and 25 dwellings. Is that the threshold?
That's correct, so it's right on the threshold.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Okay, so anything, again, status and timescales and whether there's any schemes and so on and so forth?
So the site was promoted to us by the Council's Property Services team. It's an existing car park. We have been advised by Parking Services it's currently surplus to requirements. So in terms of capacity, the site was assessed according to the Hammond Court typology, and it's considered that gentle densification could be achieved on this site. The site's close to Winchmore Hill Broadway Local Centre. And we've spoken to Chris Cole, Head of Transport Policy, and in his view, in terms of the loss of the car parking site, there is existing on-street parking available within the local centre. And as it's a local centre, it does have a local catchment, and therefore we don't anticipate a majority of trips to be generated by car. They're more likely to be undertaken by sustainable modes such as walking and cycling.
Okay. Just in terms of when you say surplus to requirements, is that it's underutilised, or just that from a state's perspective, they, I'm not sure it's a property service or whatever this place is called, it's decided it no longer wishes to operate the car park?
So we've been advised by Parking Services. It's surplus to requirements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was clear. Okay.
Just to add as well, we've been advised as well by Property Services that they have done feasibility work on the site and they're looking potentially to dispose of the site next year. So there's a bit more certainty with this one.
Okay, thank you. And where are you placing this in the trajectory? 5-year supply? Not 5-year supply?
It's currently years 5 to 10. We're conscious that although we're at a relatively advanced stage in terms of developing proposals for the site, there isn't a live planning application at the moment. So, yeah, we'd be more comfortable with pushing the 29 units into years 10 plus to be consistent with our approach on other sites.
Okay, I mean, obviously, I don't want to be helping you, and well, I do want to be helping you. I'm playing devil's advocate, challenging that point. Clearly, it's an allocation. If it was adopted, there'd be an allocation, and we know what the framework talks about in terms of deliverable sites for allocations. There must be clear evidence that the site could come forward in 5 years. I only ask is if you have information, evidence to suggest that it's going to be disposed of, and you're working on, and things are being worked on in terms of feasibility and so on and so forth, and it's 29 dwellings, we're not talking about 300, 400 dwellings, is it actually outside the realms of reasonableness to conclude that this couldn't be delivered in 5 years, in the next 5 years? I mean, it's 29. I mean, it may not be a significant issue either way. But I think I don't want to say this. We don't want to get necessarily where there is a potential justification for being deliverable. That it's just we haven't got a plan application. Put it in 10 years. Not what the framework says. If you have evidence, and it sounds like there is some evidence, it might not be. You've not got a plan application, but it's not. It's not. Unlike some of these other schemes where there doesn't appear to be anything proceeding at the moment, it seems like it's gone beyond that.
Yeah, I think from the discussions with property services, it's more advanced than some of the other sites. As I said, they're looking to potentially put it on the market next year. So that is different to some of the other locations we've been talking about today and this week. So I can see the benefit of actually staying in the 5-year supply.
I think I just raise that view to think about when you're doing your trajectory, rather than these are your points to me, but I occasionally challenge that thinking if it.
Yes, it is a very small site, and we probably say it may be that it falls into that last year of supply or last 2 years of supply.
Yes, so I'm hoping some of these discussions will reduce the need to discuss the trajectory, or some aspects of the trajectory. It won't mean there'll be no discussion of the trajectory, I'm sure, when we get to it. But it will perhaps help. So, in terms of, yes, I think I've probably picked up the proximity of the centre because I've queried in my own notes about whether or not there'd be any impact on the vitality and viability. Obviously, there's any effects of loss of parking, which they say parking services is surplus, and then any effects on the vitality of the centre, which I assume falls into the same. What you've told me about. There is on-street parking in the area. It is accessible. It is a local centre, not drawing people in from a wide catchment and so on. So okay, I'll take it that there's no concern there. Sorry, just have to keep turning this on. In terms of infrastructure requirements, obviously, yes, we've got the same suggested mods on active travel. Nothing to say there really at the moment. It is quite a small site, so probably quite logical. It won't be huge rafts of infrastructure requirements. Again, would be justified by 29 dwellings. In terms of design, you've got maximise. There's some again. We're talking mostly about issues of consistency and effectiveness and clarity. So, but what we just talked about within the set of Palmer's Green Junction, which includes numerous non-designated heritage assets. So again, probably some reference there, reflecting the significance and status of those. But you have gone to the calling it an amber issue, so must have some bearing on proposals. It may well be relating to that's why you've set a limit of 18 metres coming down. So that might be one of the reasons for that, or it might just be that it is actually again you've got some residential developments I think joining the site to the east. So again, that might be a bearing. But again, we'll be talking about there's an inconsistency in terms of living conditions reference, and again, how that is dealt with is to be determined. And then parking is, they say the standard issue on parking. It's PTAL 2, but so again, what does minimised residential parking mean? And if it's as the suggestion in the modification is, it's aligning with the London plan, then if that's what the council's content with, fine. If it's not, then sorry, I know I keep saying the same thing on that. And that's all I have to say on that one. I think. Thank you. Thank you. Useful. So URB 27. South Street. Oh, right, okay, slightly strange one. So this is a sort of split scheme. So it's 2 plots, 2 parcels. Interestingly, in this one, again, it's not necessarily it's not unsound, I suppose, and I understand it, but where you've got other estates where, you know, the infills are in quite small parts of that estate, you've drawn the red line around the whole estate and identified, where here you've just, focused very much on the infill. Again, particularly, sometimes it's not unsound. It's not interesting to understand the reasons for that, and if there's, just for my understanding of the whole situation. But again, we're talking about quite small, only just inside the threshold, just outside the threshold for allocation anyway. So is there anything you want to just tell me about this one?
Yes, sir. So similar to other estate opportunities we've covered so far as part of stage 2, it was promoted to us by Council's housing team. They commissioned our architectural services team to do a bespoke assessment. So that's been used, informed by the character of growth study, to inform capacities on this site.
Okay. And is this one, notwithstanding what we've just been talking about on the last one, where it sounded like there was movement, is this sort of in the same category as the other estates where there's no particular movement or scheme in place?
That's correct, sir,
So,
yes.
albeit it's only 29 dwellings,
Yeah.
you'd still think that wouldn't be a deliverable site.
I think that's right, sir. So just on the land use requirements, it's described here slightly differently to the other infill sites. So I think we probably should amend it just for consistency. So it should provide new homes through infill development.
Right. There's nothing. Nothing. Again, well, obviously, nothing out of the ordinary, shall we say, with infrastructure requirements and some of the issues on design principles. And again, I think, yeah, even the parking, again, it talks about minimising parking. I think the way the modification is set out here isn't, in the schedule, in E6.1, isn't quite accurate about what the modification is. But again, that's a general, that's going to be tidied up, I'm sure. It will be tidied up by the time, both in terms of language, but also format, because some of these, as we said before, the highlighted TFL type modifications not formatted correctly in terms of what's being deleted and what's being new text, but it's not quite accurate, that one, because it's the policy talks about limited residential parking to promote active travel. It's back to the minimise in consistent with the London plan. It's PTAL 3, subject to any change in that. And then it does say again, the 3 heritage assets adjacent to land parcels. So you probably ought to be setting out what those heritage assets are and what effect they will have. And I guess in this context, it doesn't say listed or non-listed, non-designated, so it's a bit unclear there. And again, just the other sort of consistency issue, other than, I guess, living conditions, is the reference to King's Head Hill view. It's an important view. So, again, I assume, well, rightly or wrongly, you'll tell me, but the fact the D, criterion D, it puts a limit on heights. It may be being mindful of the fact it's in a view, maybe, but again, probably some kind of cross-reference or reference to how the view is important to that site.
That's noted, sir. Thank you.
Okay, but I have nothing else on that one, I don't think. So, that's anything from you? Yeah. So, we'll move on then to URB 28. So I think this is one where the council has got something you want to tell me. So, just bear with me 1 second. So the allocation, and obviously you'll tell me what the situation is at the moment anyway, if there are changes, but just as a general point, we're into the realms again of the land use requirement not necessarily tallying with the table and it not being particularly clear until you delve perhaps into the hearing statement. And the hearing statement refers to approximately 45,000 square metres. I don't know where that number comes from because it's not 80 something, but it does talk about an uplift or a net increase of 25,375. So at least it's sort of clear where that 25,375 comes from. Less clear perhaps where the 80,753 comes from, but I'm sure you're going to explain that, including any other change. So just, and you want to talk me through where we are with this?
Yes, thank you, sir. So the site, as originally promoted to the council, was for an intensified scheme that resulted in the net additional 25,000, which is stated in the implementation part of the policy. But at Regulation 19, the site promoter offered or suggested that they could deliver a more intensive unit than would deliver the 25,000 square metres that would broadly correlate to a typology E in the intensification evidence, which is a multi-deck, quite high building, 4 stories high, with ramped deck access. So, they also provided some additional feasibility work to support that capacity. At the time the plan was drafted and the plan was submitted, this was a totally untested format. We hadn't seen something this intense in London before, so it was considered incredibly aspirational rather than being more on the realistic side at the time. But in the intervening period, we're aware that Amazon have put applications in 2 other councils, one in Hull and one in Northampton, for a scheme similar to that. They're currently building out their Hull proposal, and I understand they're about to start on the Northampton proposal. So this is becoming a more realistic prospect for Amazon. Hence why the council has accepted that there is additional capacity on this site. It is fair to say it is long-term capacity. The council currently has an application on what's almost the undeveloped part of this site, which is a large car park and hard standing. We currently have an application for facilities, EV charging and amenity facilities related to the warehouse. So it's quite clear that it's not going to be developed in the immediate future, but with the feasibility work and knowing that Amazon are busy constructing similar units elsewhere at the moment, the 80,000 seems a reasonable number.
Sorry, so the note that I got through Net was that you were looking to support a more ambitious proposal.
The more ambitious proposal is the 80,000, which is in the land use requirement. For the purposes of assessing need, adding up numbers, we had previously taken the 25.
So is the 80,000, so the 80,000 is net?
Yes, it's a net additional. It's a very low density site at the moment with about 30% plot ratio, if I remember.
Although obviously this hasn't been published, and no, it's not prejudicing, not coming anyway. The figure that was put in the note to me, which hasn't admitted has not been published yet, was 100,000.
That's the total scheme.
That's the gross.
Yes, that's the gross scheme. It is, I say, it goes from being what is essentially a crinkly shed on a 38% plot ratio to being 4 stories high, ramped, decked. That's what gives you the 100,000 total.
So,
I think there's a typo in the land use policy, somewhere the 8753, I think should be 8735 on the basis of the numbers.
but so in terms of the plan that's submitted, I suppose I'm a bit, again, easily confused.
Yeah.
But the plan is submitted and as consulted on
Yeah.
was for a net increase of 80,700, or whatever that figure is, just say for sake of what's in the plan, 80,753. So that, you're telling me, actually ties in with what the site promoter was proposing.
Yeah, but when we'd added up the numbers to add up to the 300,000 quantum, we had only taken the net additional 25 that was originally promoted by the developer through their call for sites.
So the change then isn't that you're seeking something different to what was in the submitted plan.
No.
If you take the land use requirement as policy and the table as something else,
Yeah.
it's that there's an error, effectively an error in your, there's an arithmetic error
Essentially.
in that. So there's an extra 60 or 55,000 square metres of floor space that would count towards the 303,000 figure.
So yeah, exactly. We'd counted what the site promoter had originally promoted and evidenced to us, not what came forward at Regulation 19 and the feasibility work that followed.
So, right. So actually, there's no change to what the council is seeking to deliver on that site effectively.
No.
But when we've been talking in the past about delivery and supply and what and why and what is needed to meet the 303 figure, 303, then that would now have to change. And so I'd need to look in E1 or E2, whichever. I think it's E1, isn't it? It's got the list of sites. They would need to be. I'd need to check the arithmetic on those.
Yeah.
Now, and maybe this is a point where obviously we need to go. I'm hoping you've done the arithmetic, but you know what that does, other than just add 55,000-ish or whatever it comes to square metres to the thing, what that does in practical terms, in terms of the strategy, and inevitably what I'm going to be asking is what that means for the roughly similar amount of floor space that's proposed in Greenbelt.
You're right, so it increases our brownfield supply, although admittedly right towards the end of the plan period. So it doesn't deal with our short-term immediate requirements and our short-term deficits at the moment. But it does mean if we rely on this, at the moment the plan as submitted was reasonably balanced on its employment numbers, including its Greenbelt sites. It now means that we have a surplus. We haven't gone through all the other sites and all the other changes that might flow, but it is an additional 50,000 that we had not counted or we weren't relying on because we didn't have the confidence at the time that the plan was made and the plan was drafted to see the delivery of 100,000 square metres. It is a very untested, well, it was at the time an untested format that we had not seen actually delivered anywhere, and we still haven't seen it delivered in London. But given that Amazon are rolling out similar formats elsewhere, we just have more confidence that over the plan period, admittedly not short term, that capacity can be realised, and we for once have a willing developer who isn't looking for a nil net adjustment to their policy. It just seems to us that given we have a developer asking for a minimum, and so maybe they can get more, who knows, it does seem positive to count that and not just set it aside. If we didn't have new evidence, if we hadn't seen these things going up elsewhere, if they were just paper plans, we'd probably be a little bit more sceptical about it.
But other than it not being clear between the land use requirement row and the table, and it's not, and frankly, it's not really been clear throughout the entire plan how this all fits together and works and what's policy and what isn't. What you're actually proposing is no different. So in terms of what the plan expects from, all right, say perhaps because of the nature of this script, I've not necessarily picked up on the partly because sometimes it refers to gross, sometimes it refers to net, sometimes it's got both figures. What the how this works, and say the arithmetic of it all. I guess what you'd have been telling me when asking the question, inevitably, please clarify all of these different numbers, you'd have been telling me that, well, while it's potentially 80,000 square metres net, we're only relying on 25,000 square metres net because that's what we think might be, and I might well have gone away and said that's very confusing, probably not a very effective or sound policy. What you're now telling me is that actually you were right all along, in effect, that 80,000 net increase is is sound.
So, yeah, 80,000 is the most intensive typology of industrial intensification that was developed through the intensification work. It increases the plot ratio, I think, to nearly 200%, because it is so dense. And I say we have not seen that type of development in London, and as people aren't willing to promote it at that kind of density to us, but here we have, and we have an established occupier who has a track record of starting to roll forwards these. It's a very bespoke product to Amazon, as you can imagine, if they're pumping them out, developing them in Hull, where there is not such a constraint on land. It's for operational reasons that they like this 4-storey intensive development. So it's only, I think the planning applications for those only went in 2000, and they're only just breaking ground on them now. So it is cutting edge.
I was slightly, without reminding myself of the numbers, obviously the numbers in the Greenbelt are around 117,000, 18,000 square metres, so not in the same 55. But clearly, if you were to look at, does this alter your exceptional circumstance argument for releasing or removing land from the Greenbelt for these 3 sites? Just so I understand.
Yes, sir. I mean, firstly, there are a number of changes that have been made to different sites as we've gone through. So we're obviously aware of there must be an implication for the argument, but it's something we need to look at when we've sort of seen where all the sites sit. As Mr. Bessel said, there are 2 strands to that argument. There's a meeting quantum, but there's also timing and delivery points. And I think Mr. Bessel's referred to this being likely at the end of the plan period. I think there's some other information perhaps I'll just ask him to give on why we believe that's particularly the case in relation to this site, that it's likely to come forward right at the end of the plan period. So that will need to be considered in the round.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, generally speaking, there's going to be a stage 3 MIQ anyway relating to the housing supply position, and we'll return to that point in the context of 5-year supply and the overall supply. So we knew that. There will be, I wasn't necessarily intending to go back over matter 3 to look at the issues already discussed in terms of employment land or floor space. However, clearly there will be an action in relation to updating. It may well be as an MIQ in terms of policy E1, because there'll be a discussion about policy E1 outside the overall requirements. We've talked about that, I haven't fed back on that yet, but I no doubt will be at some point. That might have some implications as well. But there'll be a discussion about other aspects of E1, and clearly updating that table and providing updated, for want of a better word, well, it would be a trajectory, but really a supply table based on after we've had all these discussions. Will obviously be necessary to see where, say we're just basically where the arithmetic takes us, if nothing else. If a note on that was provided when the council had then a change in position on exceptional circumstances, then clearly you want to make that point, and we would have to have a discussion about it in stage 3. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a significant change in terms of the arithmetic, but it's not a significant change in terms of policy, because the policy actually was for that anyway. You've now just, I guess what you're again trying to think of it from a soundness perspective, you're now more confident in your justification than you perhaps were in March 2024.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Just bear with, I just want to, there's something in the Regulation 22 statement about this site that I want to, and it may well be that what you've just talked about is exactly what my note referred to before you'd updated me. So let me just bring up that, get the right page number. Because it does talk about, I'm sorry, I've got so many versions of the Regulation 22 statement, I invariably open the wrong one.
I think that's our apology, sir, not yours.
Where are you? Where are you? Oh, there you are. I just wanted to double. There's no statement of common ground, is there? With the no, yeah. So I've got the Regulation 22 statement refers to the council clarifying. This is with the developer, but I'm trying to find the exact reference to. Is this ADL or Erily development? So it's ADL. We acknowledge ADL's suggestion to clarify the 80,750 is an estimate, not a limit. Therefore, the council will consider updating policy you want to reflect this capacity as a minimum, allowing for higher capacity if an appropriate design solution is found. Further engagement, stage of common ground will be essential to ensure these adjustments align from Enfield's growth objectives. This is it. Sorry, it's the next. Sorry, it's on page B479, and it's the the third row on there, where it says comments are noted. Clarification will be included in the statement of common ground. I haven't got that. But the council is happy to work with ADL to clarify these points further and ensure mutual understanding and agreement on these matters. So, effectively, is that what you're now saying you've done, to all intents and purposes, albeit perhaps not in direct discussion, but from understanding the picture as a whole?
Yes, I think so. I haven't been party of conversations with them, but following their paper trail and following, I say, what we understand Amazon are promoting elsewhere, it now seems far more of a reasonable prospect that that capacity can be realised on this site. Knowing Amazon are on the site at the moment, knowing Amazon have other sites around Enfield that they use for parking and overflow, essentially. There is more of a track record behind this now. Admittedly, it's the last 2 years, but we can now point to something on the ground and say, yes, we know that density, that 200%, which sounds really high, Amazon are working with and busy promoting themselves. And I say the fact they're promoting it in market areas that are not as constrained for land as us just demonstrates there's an operational need for that bulk scale and massing, in addition to just simply securing land. But I say for us, it seems it's still a long-term prospect. I say, given that we have an application on the land at the moment, not for intensive development, not for something that you'd expect to be there for 20 years, but it just pushes its timing beyond 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and even 10 years. If you're investing on the site today, you're not going to pull it down tomorrow, and we have no formal planning application for that big scheme at the moment. So the council is trying to be as aspirational as it can with its industrial supply, while still trying to be reasonably cautious.
Okay, thank you. I understand that a lot better now. Thank you. So we know where we are with that. We'll get on to some more of the more practical discussions about the policy and the inset maps, and the more, if you like, mundane, less exciting things about employment land figures, which I do quite enjoy. Just as a practical thing, I did, and it's not the only site where this is the case actually, but it's the one I think probably because representations are referred to it, so it's, if you like, just draw my attention to it a little bit more. The inset map does seem to refer to things which are outside the red line of the allocation. So the question there is, well, why? I suppose. So if you've got things like the orange blob and the green hatched area and so on and so forth, they're important parts of why are they not? I mean, it's the other side of the argument where it might be able to say, well, actually, we don't need to because we can have off-site delivery of these things as long as the policy provides it. Absolutely fine, and I'll bear that in mind when you've put the red line around sinks and green belts and things of that nature. For the other, because you've told me that it must be in the red line, otherwise you won't be able to achieve it. So well, these things all come back to haunt you, I'm afraid. So is there an issue with the inset map?
So yeah, you're correct in observing, sir, that outside the red line boundary are certain key features such as Mossops Creek Park, and it's the intention that ambitious redevelopment of this site could deliver improvements to local assets such as the adjacent local open space. Yeah, as you say, there may be benefits in extending the red line boundary to include these assets to make sure that a comprehensive placemaking approach could be secured. But yeah, we take on board your wider point that there needs to be consistency between allocations and that we kind of plump for one or the other rather than going for a kind of potentially confusing mix of the two approaches.
I would say that generally speaking, and Mr. Dale Harris will tell me if I'm wrong here, that the words trump the map anyway here. So if the wording will say what is required, and if it talks about off-site improvements, that might be sufficient. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just making the point that when I've said to you in the past, why have you put that sink in the allocation? You said, well, because otherwise we won't be able to get the improvements. So yeah, that's I'm merely, if there's an inconsistency there, okay. You may wish to think about it, but it might also be the case that it's perfectly justifiable and deliverable to refer to off-site improvements will be required, subject to SIL, obviously SIL regs and everything else. I mean, I'm sure most developers are going to be very keen for those caveats to be added somewhere if they need to be. The other thing on the inset map, I will say is again, and I raise this again because reps have been put to me, put to you actually through the Reg 19, but by definition put to me. And again, I raise this in relation to the discussion that was had a couple of weeks ago with one of the employment sites in the placemaking areas, where the practicalities of delivering what was on the inset map were sort of highlighted, and the difficulties of certain requirements for the, if you like, I suppose there's less scope for flexibility perhaps if you're talking about warehousing than a housing scheme where you can, or the smaller commercial schemes we might have layout issues. So I don't know, and I think this actually is also where the Reg 22 statement refers to, the council being happy to clarify points and ensure mutual understanding. So whether there are, again, I take the fact the inset map is illustrative, but whether or not there are requirements there which would actually, from having considered they're not here, but having considered their representations, have you any views on whether or not there are requirements that would be prejudicial to delivering the scheme?
So I think there are some aspects of the inset map which, taking on board the views of the site promoter, could be improved. So, for example, active frontages are shown on the inset map to basically extend to the kind of the kind of bottom triangle of the site, so the majority of the site boundary. It would be very difficult to achieve that level of active frontage for a logistics scheme. So practically speaking, it's kind of literally kind of reception area, creches, welfare facilities, things like that, that would provide that activity, and there's simply not going to be enough of those types of activity to bound the entirety of the site. So there's a degree of realism which would be needed there, and maybe the inset map could be modified to just show the key areas where we'd like to have eyes on the street, surveilling the public realm. Similarly, showing the map shows new green space, kind of extending a little bit into the site. That doesn't match the green space on site currently. So I think again, a degree of realism should be employed there. So there is some scope to increase the width of that kind of green buffer, but maybe not kind of extending into the site, which might kind of prejudice the bringing forward of a kind of a large floor plate building, which is of the kind that would be needed to achieve the level of floor space capacity intended by policy.
So I think the site we were discussing the other day was the Prologis at Ravenside, which had green features running through the site and an indicative walking route through the site, which for a secure multi-deck warehouse, we agree, isn't pragmatic. We don't have quite the same here, but Dr. Jones is right, there are issues with the way the policy is worded about the treatment, the edge treatment that I think was being picked up by the site promoter as more of a we'll try to, but we have to be realistic, and I think we're alive to that being realistic, especially given what we've seen, the format coming forward. It doesn't lend itself to active frontages all the way around it.
So I think I would be content to see a suggested main modification, ensuring that anything which is obviously likely to prejudice the delivery of what you're seeking to achieve is not justified or effective. So at least I would like to see what the alternative would be, and that will help me come to a view on it. Okay. Deal with that. So all the general things, let me just pull up the mods. We've got infrastructure requirements are fairly standard issues again, as are the modifications. Or suggested modifications. I do understand that, again, there's some suggestion there about some of these issues being amended from the site promoter, but I say they're not here to explain their thinking on some of these, so hey-ho. obviously there are issues consistency. You may wish to look at some of that and whether any changes that you might wish to make to the inset map to ensure effectiveness would also then alter obviously the wording. Whether or rather the other way around, I suppose, whether the wording needs to change to be consistent with the revised inset map. I just want to say a couple of things. Again, should and must should facilitate the delivery of the Enfield. I don't know. No, sorry. We've got the parking. Should utilise roof space to deliver green roofs and/or photovoltaics. Yeah, we've talked about that before in relation to employment sites. So, but that might be something that comes out of the wash when we do deal with the energy efficiency policies in the fullness of time. I know that there's no reference in this policy to the River Lee navigation, but in I think it's 29, which is just up the road, I think, or just down the road. There are such references about overshadowing or impacts of overshadowing along the River Lee navigation paths, massing built form arrangement. I don't know. Again, you will know whether there's an inconsistency there or whether it's not inconsistent. But I wanted to just flag it up, obviously, because they're both adjacent to the River Lee navigation. The other thing, and of course, I don't know whether here it does talk about things, and say on UB 29, whether it does talk about things like buffers or setbacks or things. So, but of course it does in relation to other watercourses again. So, but there are generic policy or DM policies relating to watercourses and buffers and so on. So we'll get to that as well. But again, you might just want to look at that. There's nothing in this one about highway safety, and I've noticed again, even though it's one of those things where you can, of course, highway safety is going to be an issue, but you've taken the trouble of specifically mentioning highway safety in relation to some of the other employment sites, and I guess it's because of the nature of the use there and the access lorries coming in and out and so on. So that's possibly why it's been flagged up specifically, but so why wouldn't it be flagged up here, I guess, in the same vein, but again, or doesn't need to be flagged up at all because highway safety is covered by your transport policies and therefore is a requirement everywhere and anywhere. So again, it's how we deal with that while minimising the pain. The site is you've said the site is in flood zone 1, EA have said it's in flood zone 2 and 3. Whether or not how flooding is dealt with in the site, or flood risk rather, and is dealt with, and whether it's a case of avoiding areas of risk or minimising risk or providing adequate mitigation, cross-reference to flooding policies or whatever way of making sure that all these things are dealt with in a consistent and effective manner. And those sort of the general consistency issues in relation to the allocations, obviously some actions. The other one I should point out here is that it does talk about within the approach to Enfield important local view as well. So again, whether there's an issue there or not needs to be flagged. Particularly if it's this one doesn't actually say height of buildings, does it? Yeah. So. And again, UB 29 and others, there are references to whether or not what the heights of buildings are. I don't know if this, without looking at Appendix D, this is in a tall building area or not.
It is in a tall building area. That's correct, sir. Yeah. So it'd be the standard approach.
You'll want to check, no doubt, that whatever the appendix says about building heights here isn't going to lead to a change in your view on whether 80,000 square metres net is deliverable or not, I guess. So I think there are, say, inset map, general issues of consistency and so on. And then there's the more general action about which doesn't just relate to this site, but I will want to see that if I was to conclude that the, I guess, effectively removal or alteration of the 25,000 figure is sound, and justified what that means for the overall picture. Okay.
That's very helpful, sir. Thank you.
So could I just clarify in terms of the flood risk? This is another one. We had one of these yesterday where the EA put a rep in, and it follows very tightly towards the Riverlea navigation, and only just very, very narrowly goes onto the site. So the majority, if not 99% of the site, is in flood zone 1. So we're comfortable that it could be accommodated outside any flood risk areas, but of course we can cross-reference to relevant policies where needed. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, it's always awkward. This is awkward in every exam. How you get to allocations and draw out the generic things versus the site. And you can skin the cat in many different ways. It's ensuring, obviously, that users of the plan are clear. What is, how it's all working together, I suppose, and where, I suppose, if there are inconsistencies in approach, that it's understood that's not, it should go without saying, really, but, it doesn't mean that flooding isn't, we haven't mentioned flooding, it doesn't mean it's not important, clearly, it's not going to be the case, not least because it's next to a river. So, it's going to be important anyway. It's more than a hectare, there's going to be a flood risk assessment, it's all these things sort of, but, how it could be. So yes, okay, thank you. Unless there's anything more on that or any clarity, are the actions clear enough? No, okay, good. So we'll move on then to, as we've just talked about, URB 29. Sorry? Just up the river, yeah. So here we have, so again, I think there's a little bit of clarity on numbers. So the plan says 32,500. It just says provide a minimum of, so I take it that might be the gross figure. And then 13,500 in the table, I could assume that's the net figure. But just confirm and clarify that, and obviously where we are in terms of status and so.
Yes, that's correct, sir. So the 32,000 figure is the gross, which would yield a net additional employment floor space of 13,500. So this site was promoted to us as part of the Call for Sites exercise. We don't have a live planning application on site currently.
Okay, well, as I say, I think we've talked in the past, haven't we, about it's probably logical, if not for the avoidance of doubt, for the land use requirements to refer to the gross and net where intensification is being proposed. Just so, again, for well, I don't know how many times I've said consistency in this plan, but for consistency's sake, but also for, I guess, for just clarity and making sure it's not there's no ambiguity. I think it's maybe what you've just said, same sort of thing. I'll just pick up the flooding issue, may well be the same point as you just made. It's obviously, EA have raised the point that it's in flood zone 2 or 3, or at least is affected by flood zones 2 and 3. Maybe the same sort of issue.
Yeah, it's slightly greater risk on this one, but again, it only covers a very small, in general, a small proportion of the site. So again, it can be delivered in flood zone 1. But same applies to what we've just said on the other side, really.
And by the same token, it will be just double checking there's nothing in, I don't think there's anything refers to specifically flooding. But in this case, if there's, this might be one where you would say, we expect delivery to take place within the areas of flood zone 1 if it can be delivered. So it's very clear if that's the expectation. So mods. So here we have on the infrastructure principles, infrastructure requirements even, the an additional suggested modification, which is very specific about bus provision along the A1055, which is not referred to, I don't think, in URB 28 or in suggested modifications. I mean, again, these seem quite close sites. I would have thought, just on the face of it, they'd be generating similar sorts of issues about, so, sorry to say it again, consistency. And whether it's necessary. I mean, again, I don't doubt that something that the council and TfL will be considering when an application was coming for 32,500 square metres of employment floor space, or 80,000 or 100 on the other side, whether or not improvements to public transport services are needed, and that would be part of the normal course of events. So I don't think it's not unreasonable for the policy to say that, but as long as it's obviously couched in terms of what is necessary in silver eggs and so on. But again, I have to come back to all that. The whole thing about contributions must be informed by expected chip generation and coordinated TFL to ensure economic viability considering limited frontier. I'm not sure about that. As I said the other day, logically, if contributions are needed to improve public transport to make the scheme acceptable, and they are not sustainable or deliverable, then presumably that would mean ultimately the scheme is not acceptable, and revisions would have to be made or whatever. And again, I don't necessarily have the evidence in front of me to say that's not the case, and TfL aren't saying it's not the case. They just want that caveat in, so I don't think it's not obviously not impossible. But I think again, if TfL were here, we might be having some interesting discussions about some of these ones. In terms of the design principles, again, we've got an A, it should provide stacked industrial use. I mean, should or must, I guess I suppose it might be one of those things that you probably don't need to say must. It might just be actually the only way you can do it is to deliver that, and therefore, but I suppose if in some weird and wacky way they were able to deliver what you wanted without doing that, you'd be quite okay with it, even if it's, it might not be possible, but fine. You've got, interestingly, a reference in, so you have got a reference in this one in criterion E to setting the building line back from the river lee navigation to create a linear open space, which I think is sort of what's proposed on the print on the inset map for URB 28, but not referred to in the text. So, again. And I know what you just said about URB 28 this visibility, but it might mean you could still deliver a green, a buffer. Might not be the same as what's set out in the policies map, in the inset map. H should consider the impact on long views from the east of the reservoir when designing the building frontages along the river. Okay. No reference there to long view, but it just happens to be a particularly important local view there, presumably.
It's not identified in the development plan as an important view of note. That's more of a kind of localised consideration.
Okay, fine. I'm assuming that I isn't 39 metres, if it should be 36. Yeah. I only highlight J, again, more in relation to URB 28 than this, and whether it's the same sort of things apply. K, for similar points, this is one where you have to talk about, providing sufficient space for the highway improvements. Should provide limited parking. We know where we are with parking. I think my laptop's trying to tell me something because it died yet again. And I think here, again, there's probably, and my laptop's died, not telling me, but I think the suggestion of a new criterion into the design principles, which relates to active travel. Again, it's why here, not elsewhere. The design, that active travel thing generally seems to be an infrastructure requirement. These are not all, again, these are not, they're all sensible things to be trying to achieve, no doubt. It's just how they're all expressed and how how it's all set out in the plan. And then I guess the same point I've just said is how albeit it may not be a significant issue in principle with how flooding is dealt with, which we've already talked about. So that's that. So again, mainly familiar things, I'm afraid. But generally some actions there, I think. Anything more on that one? No. There's no issue on here about as far as you're concerned, there's no issue about the floor space, though. That's all as should be. Okay. So URB 31. I think you've informed me that this is complete.
That's right. So yes, this is complete, and it's one which it's within the sill. So we don't consider there's any need for a policy to shape further amendments. So this is one we think deserves no.
And just to follow that, also practically speaking, the implemented. Thank you.
We turn each other's off as we.
I see. Thank you. And just to add to that, the implemented extension is quite a significant extension. There's very little of the site that remains to be developed, so we're content that the sill policies in the local in the plan, as well as the kind of the lack of development potential in the short term at least, should be adequate in safeguarding against any potential negative impacts coming from future development.
Okay. Just in terms, again, I suppose thinking about this again, just when looking at recalculating, doing the arithmetic for the 303,000, then of course completions will be, just as they are with housing, will be a factor of that. So I guess we'd still want to see how this scheme fitted into that, if it's been completed in restart. I don't know what the figures are, obviously, of what's been implemented, but if that 3,289 was meant to contribute to that 303,000, then I'll need to see how it all contributes. But okay, understood. I think, not much point further in that discussion, as we've talked about this type of site before, and where they are completed. I think, in effect, even if we did, looking at the issues I've just noted, they are all the general things we've been talking about anyway, so any action would do that. My one point, I suppose, of a matter of principle was just 3,289 square metres. Why has it been implemented? Why has it been allocated? I guess because it's not. I was told. Again, sorry, I was told that up to maybe 10,000 square metres or 6,500 square metres at IKEA as a potential opportunity there wasn't, sufficient to justify allocation, or at least I suppose there was an element of certainty there. But hey-ho, moot point if it's been built out. So I don't need to go into that too much. And then URB. So unless there's anything else you want to say on that, we'll move on to URB 33, 6 Mawson Road. Right, hold on, yeah. Yes. I must admit, at first, the slightly odd shape, I was looking at the wrong site for some point when I first looked at this, because I was looking at the enclosure of the road made me think that the actual site was the bit in the middle, but it's actually the bit to the east, isn't it? Which effectively, and you've got an access road coming to it. So there are some issues around, just to understand it was. But the one thing, obviously, from a first principle is looking at the inset map. You have that very thick dark blue line. Well, I don't know so much a line as a wedge or whatever you want to call it, a thick rectangle, basically covering practically all of the site. And we've obviously had these discussions about sometimes quite difficult to tell what some of these things are. The closest I can come to is it's suds on the quay. So obviously did want to understand what that is and whether obviously it's going to have some kind of bearing on the allocation. Bearing in mind it seems to cover, I mean, you know, illustrative or not, it seems to cover the whole area. But you'll tell me if I'm wrong there, because as I say, the only colour that looks, well, or the only other colour that's slightly is active frontage, but I don't think you've got an active frontage that thick unless there's something gone horribly wrong. So there is a blue suds mark with a dashed line around it. And if I look very, very closely, there is a dashed line around it.
We'll have to double check what that line is, or that wedge is, for you.
Okay. It is your plan, I have to say. You're the best man in the world. Well, I don't want to be too unkind, but you ought to know.
It goes back to the key issue, doesn't it? I think that would just help on each of you.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't proposed that rather large blue line going through the middle of your site, so someone along there has. So, you know, I don't think it's probably not that unreasonable for me to expect you to know what it is.
So possibility, we'll confirm, the possibility is that it's the power line exclusion zone.
Oh, okay. Right,
So
okay.
just above suds, but there's no, it's the colours changing because they're overlaid on each other,
Right.
which I think quite why that is, but that's another possibility anyway, but we...
Yes, fair enough. I suppose it could be. Well, yes, clearly I need some clarity on that. But if it is, well, in either case, why is it, if it's either a power line exclusion zone or SUDS, or identified as SUDS, you know, clearly some understanding of how that affects the deliverability of any floor space on here. If this is I see that it is, yes, sorry, concrete production, so there's a use on it, clearly, so that might mean that would possibly be material in how that that designation would be considered in light of any application. But I think it's important to understand what that is. even if you say, well, it doesn't do any harm to the allocation, but at least if I'm writing my report on that, I need to know what it is. But we'll put a pin in that. I mean, we've only got a couple left. I mean, with your agreement, if this is something we can bottom out today, rather than going away and getting rid, and you're okay, because obviously we are going to finish early again today, which again, sort of apologise for that in the great scheme of things, and in hindsight, could have obviously truncated this a little bit. But if we had an adjournment for once we've gone through all this 15-20 minutes where just break slightly into lunch hour and then come back and just bottom it out so I don't have to wait for any more, that would help me enormously. But if we just carry on with the rest of the discussion, because I don't, again, in the main, these are all fairly standard questions now, or points. The land use requirement is 2,600 square metres. Again, I suppose, is this because it's a concrete batching plant or concrete plant, so it may be that there is no gross net distinction here if you're not counting what's already there as existing employment floor spacing because it's only open. So it might be this that's right. There's no gross 2,600 net something else. It is just 2,600, and that presumably all counts to the figure.
Yeah, sorry, there's zero floor space on it at the moment for the purpose of our numbers. The 2,600 is a 65% plot ratio building, so it's not big enough to accommodate ramps and decks and other bits. So we've assumed it'll be built out as a fairly lowish density, although 65% outside of London is considered high, but 65% in London is the minimum. But yeah, it's only 2,600. It's 0.4 hectares.
And actually, just sorry, on E1, of course, it does say 3,289. Oh, no, beg your pardon. No, it's my fault. I'm looking at the wrong site. I'm on Snowburn. So, sorry to say 2,600. So, yeah. I'm getting confused myself now. 2,600. So, fine. But so it is, that's the, at least I understand again. So, in this case, gross is gross. Fine. And then the general, then obviously issues on the infrastructure requirements are fairly standard things. Again, EA, I think, have said this is a landfill. Sorry, this talks about it being a landfill. Sometimes you mention that, sometimes you don't, but fine. Apparently some high value trees, which I'll take your word for. We've got, again, and these are all just consistency issues. You've got to talk about how you've addressed the River Lee navigation, and so it already all comes back to, I've no particular axe to grind about these. It's more about how other sites in the same vicinity have been addressed. And then, again, I guess it's the tall building element is probably not correct. You've got views from the east, again, localised issue, fine. Highway safety, fine. Limited parking, fine. Again, and I suspect we're in exactly the same boat again with the EAs. It is a flood zone 2-3, but maybe for the same.
Yeah, that's correct. The flood zone on the inset map, it just covers part of the green hatching near the River Lee. That's it. So the kind of developable bit of the site, if you like, is flood zone 1.
So yeah, but again, they need to be sort of referred to and/or reference to SUDS. So mainly, obviously, so if we just put a pin in the actual principal issue, because if it's in an exclusion zone, what does that mean? If it's in an area where you've identified it for, I mean, I guess I've taken that if it's identified in the SUDS marking on this, it's probably some kind of existing scheme that's being promoted rather than being this is where we expect SUDS. I've just taken it that like the ones we've talked about, which are probably I guess identified for, although I'd have to go and remind myself what the generic policies say, but whether it's like again sort of an exclusion zone to deliver council SUD or EA or SUD schemes. So fine. So we'll just leave that for now. We'll move on because there's only one left, which may not take too long. And if we have a short break, come back, bottom that out, and then we can move on. So. I'll come back to that. So finally then, we're on to URB 34, 5 Pickett's Lock Lane. So this is one where I think you've indicated, again, that you are not supportive of this any longer because it's similar in nature to SA 5.8. Sorry, do you want to? Sorry. Yeah. No, you can carry it if you need to converse. Sorry. So it's where apparently I said that it wasn't a reasonable justification for allocating the site. I'm not sure I did, but I'm sure I may have pointed out it was something for me to consider. So anyway, you perhaps just want to explain why you're looking to perhaps delete this site. I did note, and again, obviously, when I was making my notes on this before, that the site has no, the estimated delivery capacity was empty, I didn't know, and that, I think, is this the one where it says 0 next to it? Yeah. Yeah, so probably understanding that. So is the point here, because I think the point on SA 5.8 was that you'd allocate, because that wasn't providing any new floor space, and so it was allocated to basically give it SIL status.
So just for the background for this site, it was promoted to the council by a third party, one of the residents groups, for intensification. So intensification evidence knew that it was already a highly developed site. So redeveloping it would only yield that 2,000 square metres, which is in the land use requirement. But we understand subsequent the site owner has come back to the council and made the case that it's currently in operational use for a warehouse, a retail warehouse scheme. They have no intention of redeveloping that unit, and even if they did, a multi-deck intensified format wouldn't suit their operational needs. So it's one of those where the quantum was deleted. A similar history was to Kenning Hall, where at one point it had floor space attached to it as an allocation, but the floor space has been zeroed essentially. So this doesn't have an implementation number, and its purpose at the moment is only that it's being moved into LSIS. It's currently an unprotected site, but given it's a fair size, 1.5 hectares, the council's proposing to move it within an industrial allocation but without floor space. So if that can be achieved through a change to the proposals map as opposed to any further allocation or any further stuff in the plan, it can be deleted and just changed to the proposals map.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I spent some of the time gained yesterday immersing myself in the London Plan employment policies, which that was a lot of fun. So I'm trying to get into grips with what it, and I'm sure I will. I see the words. I'm not entirely sure I understand the purpose of some of their expectations, but yeah, I mean, clearly just from a first principles perspective, allocating the site for industrial use doesn't give it LSIS status, does it? Because it's allocated. I don't know if that's the colouring that's been given to it might well be that, but it doesn't. It's allocated for employment use. Unless there's something I've not read yet in the e-policies, and again, I was immersing myself in those yesterday, there's nothing to say, and then maybe that is something that needs to be looked at, that once a site has been, once an allocation, well, most of the allocations are already in designated areas, aren't they? So it probably doesn't matter. But what we often get, actually, what we often get with local plans is, well, what happens once these allocations have been built out? They need that protection of existing employment. Perhaps not the case here because they're already LSIS or SIL in the main, apart from, of course, the Greenbelt sites. So what would happen? Do they become SIL? Do they become LSIS? You know, once they've been, if they're set, you know, if, how are they protected? Or are they non-designated industrial locations? That's something I hadn't thought about until now. But yeah, my view would be, just on the basis that if you want this to be, if you're basically just wanting to change this to LSIS from non-designated, then you don't need to allocate it for development. You just identify it as LSIS. Admittedly, I know the London Plan might have mechanisms for that. I don't quite know why, but yeah, you know, there's a sort of, you know, perhaps, as I say, I'm not quite found the logic as to why you have to go through this process, but that's mainly for SIL. But I will, at least when we get to the e-policies, because we've obviously got an LSIS policy to E6 to deal with those, we can look at that again, just in case there is anything, you know, lurking in the London Plan that says if you want to create new areas of LSIS, you have to go through these hoops. But certainly, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing unsound in principle. It's if this is, you know, if this meets the criteria of LSIS in terms of its function and form, that why you couldn't just identify that on the policies map and it's given that protection. So I think the only question would be is, would a site of 1.63 hectares that's already in use as something, you know, a sort of warehouse use, actually meet the criteria of LSIS in principle? And that's more of a question than whether it's suitable for allocate for new development, if that makes sense. So I suppose that if you just want to justify it on that basis now, then we can you know, reminding you have to. In fact, let's do that. We can see what's in E2, which says what the different how the different levels are defined, I think. So locally important industrial locations. These sites can deliver a broader range of activities than sills, but the business function of these sites will be safeguarded. Intensification will be encouraged. So, again, given what you've said about the history of it and everything else, did that fall into that category then? Is that?
I think it is a recognised industrial use in the London plan, but it is not a strategic industrial use, so it wouldn't fall within the SIL, but it is an important local employment site, and by bringing it into its LSIS designation, it allows our DM colleagues to apply London plan LSIS and our borough LSIS policies, which give greater weight to the protection of the employment use than an undesignated site would, and it gives more detail about how, if, when an application is made to redevelop the unit, how that should be managed from a DM purpose. But it is more signposting the site down that as a DM route, as opposed to it delivering floor space as a traditional allocation. But yeah, it's one of those that in the past it wasn't flagged as an LSIS site, it hadn't been picked up. But a 1.5 hectare B8 unit, given our pressing need for employment and given the need to reinforce the protection policies where we have established industrial use, it seems perfectly pragmatic to roll it into an LSIS.
Okay.
So I just add to that, the London plan just requires evidence to justify the designation of LSIS. Obviously, you've had a lot of evidence generally about the pressures on our industrial and employment floor space throughout the local plan hearings. So that's all part of the context as to why we need to protect the sites that we have.
Okay, I'll take all that on board. But again, I think the action, I guess, again, is where we talk about. I think my initial thinking on this, without prejudice, is to think that I don't believe it sounds like it's justified as an allocation for new floor space from what you've told me. And if actually ultimately the real purpose of allocating it was to establish it as LSIS, then I think there's a more sort of straightforward way of doing that than allocating it for development and then. Well, in fact, as I say, allocating it for development doesn't give it LSIS status. Colouring it in, as LSIS does.
Indeed, and it is coloured in on the policies map, and E6 cross-refers to that.
Yeah, which actually would have probably been wrong, because an allocation there's nothing written down that automatically gives allocations, because it's not the case for it shouldn't do anyway. Necessarily says right, and it is now LSIS because and nothing's written down to say that for the other non-designated allocations. So that's something possibly would have to be addressed anyway. So if as I say, if the greenbelt sites were deemed sound, it may well be, when I look back, yes, the allocation policies map does identify them as the LSIS or SIL colour. But of course, that's not automatic in terms of how the policy is expressed. No, that would have to be made clear.
Yes, I think it must be. It's E6 combined with the policy map that changes it to LSIS or SIL as appropriate, rather than the allocation policy.
Okay, understood. And I think, to be fair, the situation on 5.8 is a bit more complicated, I accept, but I think certainly the principle in my mind still stands, that I don't think that there's even taking the London plan to go about how you identify, I don't think allocating it for development, which is what S5.8 does, is necessarily the right way of doing it. There may be other ways that the plan expresses how that's been done and what changes have been made, but I don't see how that is necessarily the process of dealing with it.
No, I think we agree. Part of it is a timing thing, because originally they did have floor space attached to them, so we were expecting built floor space, and that would have wrapped with the new designations, that would have warranted an allocation. But on this site, we're no longer expecting floor space, So the starting rationale for that allocation has passed, and the only rationale now, the logic is to bring it within the protection of the employment policies, the same as Kenning Hall to bring it within the protection of a SIL policy, this one to bring it within the protection of LSIS, but we can achieve that via other routes.
Sounds, at least on the face of it, logical. As positive as you get. Okay, thank you. Right, so there's obviously no need, I think, on that basis to talk about the actual wording of the policy. So, right, I think we've done all of the sites on the other thing. I will. So, if it's okay, well, it is going to go into lunch, but I'm sure no one minds that, rather than half an hour just to come back. So, but if we have just because I think it's time for a break anyway. So, if we say 20 quarter past, so it gives time for a bit of a comfort break, but also time for you to have a conflab, come back, deal with that last issue, and then any closing, small C closing matters before we adjourn. Station. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Come back at 1:15. Thank you. So there's one outstanding issue on URB 33 Six Mason Road about what the inset map is showing us. So have you worked it out?
So yes, I think we can confirm it is a power line exclusion zone. Is what you see on the site allocation inset map. I'll ask Dr. Jones just to talk us through what we know and where we are on that.
Thank you. So I've reviewed the Reg 19 submission from National Grid. It does identify overhead transmission lines affecting some site allocations. This isn't an allocation which is included as part of their representation.
Yes, there's a power line which runs to the east of the site and then down the edge of the Lee navigation. You'll also have seen it, I think, the site allocation inset plan for RUR6, which is immediately to the south. That's page 548, Appendix C. Yes. So there's the same. You can see there the wider span of it. We understand that there aren't any pylons within our site, and in fact we don't think that the cables actually overfly it either. There is reference. So Avson Young, I think, in relation to the sites which do have pylons within, have asked for language in the design principles to ensure that there's a response to that. And there's also a reference to it. We have in design principle J for RUR6 a 10-metre zone around the pylons. That wouldn't itself affect any part of our site because there's not a pylon within 10 metres. If there had to be 10 metres to the cables, we think that only a very small part of the site would be affected. So we suggest we put something into the design principles to make sure that whatever development comes forward responds to that. There is currently, there are structures in the southeast corner of the site, and although the site design principles refer to buildings up to 39 metres, what we've anticipated coming forwards is a single-storey format at 65% of plot ratio. So we don't see, I think, any reason why this would prevent what we're envisaging for the site coming forwards, but we do think it needs to be referred to in the policy so it can be worked out at the development management stage.
Thank you. That's very helpful and understood. So, yeah, that would seem logical in terms of the policy, at least. Well, I suppose goes without saying, it certainly as sort of goes without saying, I suppose, that the policy should identify, if there's something on the inset map which is relevant, should refer to it. But if it's not going to be prejudicial, that's useful to know. I suppose when you get to this sort of scale, these sort of, they may look, it's a generic sort of bit drawn to a certain scale, and it obviously just looks perhaps worse than it is.
Yes, so the exclusion zone seems to follow the navigation around to the north and the west, but actually it appears that the cables cross the navigation to the south of the site, and so we're on the other side by the time they. So, I think it's probably a high-level GIS point, which is why it's.
Yeah, actually, oh yes, it could be the cap end of the line, simply gone that end, if that's where the having been a GIS nerd in my past, one of many bits of nerdery in my past. So it could be. So if that's where there's that white. I don't know what that is actually either, but it's outside the line. So if the line, if the end of the point line would have been beneath the site, south of the site, then I guess it could be a GIS issue where it's just got an end to the line that comes over. But it is what it is there. If it can be addressed through the policy, then that's fine. That's fine. That's understood. Thank you. Right, so there's an action there, obviously, to add to the other actions on that one. So thank you. Okay. Okay, so that does bring us to the end of the agenda for today and for stage 2. Are there any points council wishes to raise? Anything it wants to draw to my attention or ask me before we adjourn?
So nothing to draw to your attention or ask you, sir, beyond just to extend the thanks of the council, sir, for your patience and good humour through stage 2. Has been a fairly lengthy road with breaks and so forth, but
yes.
Just to thank you very much, sir, for your conduct. Sir.
Sort of unfortunate, but the scale. I think if I tried to do this and as I say, I did count them 87 policies in 12 chapters, MIQs for all of those, and try to do it all in one go. I don't think anyone would thank me in terms of trying to write responses to those. So the staged approach has been necessary, I think, in that respect. So obviously, again, I know it's not ideal in terms of progressing things, but it's probably the only practical way it's going to be achieved. And obviously, we know that the gap between stage 1 and stage 2 wasn't purely due to that. It's also my availability, sorting out the database. There were other things that needed to be done. So those things were also unavoidable, I suppose. And obviously, I give my thanks to the council for the way it's conducted itself, and particularly in providing me with information when it's required. But on that matter, I suppose there are a couple of things I just want to raise before we do adjourn. I haven't yet, although I know work is being progressed on it, I haven't had the responses to, or the final responses to my actions from weeks 1 and 2 yet. And I think I'm right in saying that the actions for week 3 have been published. So again, obviously, between, through a net, we'll obviously work out and discuss timescales for some of those. Where it's main modifications, they're probably just an ongoing part of keeping the schedule live. It may be that at some point I ask for an interim version of that to see where things are, and so on. And then I think I'm still. I just finished week 5, so I'm not expecting the actions for that soon. But obviously, there's week 4 and 5 still to be provided. So again, they'll need to be published in due course, and work out a programme for those things which need to be addressed, I guess, before stage 3, and whether that has any bearing on stage 3. And it may well be that actually some of it could be addressed as part of stage 3. So it might be that actually we could say, well, if there's a note needed on, for example, the updating the employment figures, well, that could be dealt with by an MIQ to policy E1, which will be there anyway. So rather than sort of task you with doing something extra, you could sort of try and combine that, because it's not going to, I don't think I necessarily need that before stage 3 or if I do, I can ask for it, clearly. In terms of, the only thing I'll say in terms of fee, as I say, in terms of feedback, you've got the agreed actions through the discussions we're obviously having. I will agree those notes, as I have done with weeks 1 to 3. And I think Mr. Reid asked me this last time about what my intention was in terms of providing formal feedback after stage 3. That will, clearly I don't think I'm going to be in a position to offer or issue any feedback on all elements of stage 2. Because, not least because, for reasons earlier, that it, about, again, whether they consistency of approach from me, so I don't want to sort of, start doing things in a scattergun, ad hoc approach. It would be sensible for me to try and do things in a sensible way. But also, clearly, even though we are, getting into development management type issues, there's still things that probably in stage 3 that's still relevant to some of the discussions we've had to, so it's always, we're still always moving along the road, aren't we, to an answer. And it might be actually premature for me to conclude with any certainty on some issues. But at least I have a far better understanding of where those issues are and what I need to know from stage 3 in order to give me a final conclusion. So it may well be that there'll be a note. And if there are certain things that are going through my notes or through your, where actually I can issue some advice on this particular point, or I decide actually on reflection I do need some more information. Even going back to some of the discussions we had in week 2, stage 1, there were some issues about evidence base, and it may be when I reflect on some of that, I may still need to come back and ask some more questions. So watch this space. Really. I can't say categorically what it will be, but if I obviously it's within my scope and remit to be able to write to you whenever I need to. In terms of timing for stage 3, I don't know. I think Annette may have already spoken to you about this. My hope, subject to obviously again reflecting on things, is that we could start stage 3 on around the 20th of September, 20th of October, which would mean me trying to get MIQs out for the end of August, or at least no later than the first week of September. And that's necessary anyway to give notice for people, obviously for people time to write statements, but also I'm on annual leave. You may as well. I'm on annual leave myself for a couple of weeks then. So I think certainly we can hard pencil in, assuming council's okay with this, and I say I think Annette's already raised it, 20th of October and the 27th of October, two clear weeks, and then we need to think about what additional time might be needed to go through and when we can programme the remaining time. I'd be surprised if we can deal with it all in 2 weeks. So there's a lot of, unfortunately, I know it seems like things are dragging on. We're taking a lot of, and there's been a couple of days where we could have got a bit more in perhaps, but there are a lot of policies, and some of those are going to be quite quick, but there are some which still remain. I think, such as, affordable housing, tall buildings, BNG, these are still things which are potentially going to take some time to resolve. So they are going to take some time. So my gut feeling at the moment is at least 3 weeks, if not 4 weeks, of hearing time will be needed to get through the remaining issues. So for the first 2 weeks, but I need to obviously liaise with Annette about her availability, my availability, council's availability, venue, etc., etc. So we'll deal with that in due course. If that's all right. Is that all acceptable? Clear?
Thank you, sir. Yes, that's all acceptable. I should say, so you've reminded me that I also should extend council's thanks to the programme officers,
yes,
particularly Annette, but also Mr. Feeney here today.
Yes, no. Annette and Steve have been excellent, and it's been run very, very smoothly, and I appreciate it. Obviously, we've still got several weeks to go, so I think there's time again to offer thanks for all this. So we don't want to be, and you've not seen my report yet, so you might not be too thankful. Joking. Right. So if there's nothing else, I will adjourn now, and we will resume at a time to be agreed. But for now, thank you all for your contributions. Have safe journeys home and a good weekend. And if I don't see you again, Mr. Dale Harris, thank you. I don't know, obviously, what's going to be the station.
Thank you very much, sir, and have a good holiday.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.